Oh, wait.
My name is Michelle Bogan. I am the public co-chair of this consortium.
And I'm Santino Provenzano, the industry co-chair. Welcome, everybody. I think we're going to, for the sake of time, because we have a lot of ground to cover, and I know we're in an afternoon session, so I want to be respectful of everybody's commute going home. I think we're just going to roll into the agenda today. If there's anyone that's new that would like to identify themselves, I would certainly be glad to give you a minute, but I think we're going to skip the round table today so we can get to the agenda. Okay, seeing nothing, we'll start with item number 2, Alafia River and Manatee River BMAP updates. And that's Anita with FDEP. It's going to walk us through that.
Hi there. Well, it's great to be here with you all. Really glad for the opportunity and look forward to future events as well, where we can come and get together with you guys. So my name is Anita Stein. I'm the basin coordinator for the Alafia River and Manatee River BMAPs. I'm gonna share my screen here. Let me know when you see it, or else I can see it on your screen maybe if I'm lucky.
Yep, we see everything now.
All right, good. Let me know if I need to change anything. Also with me today, we have Moira Homan, who runs the program Water Quality Restoration Program, and she is in DEER over all of the BMAPs and the BMAP coordinators. Also, I'm expecting Ken Weaver. And Ken, are you in person or are you on the call?
He's on the call.
Okay, cool. I thought I heard him earlier, so I wasn't sure.
I'm on the call. Can you hear me, Anita?
I hear you great now. Thanks, Ken.
Good.
Nice to see you, Nate. Cool. All right, and Ken Weaver is the deputy director over DEER at DEP, and so he's heavily involved with all the stuff, TMDL assessment and standards and all of it. So anyhow, I guess I'll go ahead and kick off. We have a lot of material to cover, and I want to make sure we have time for questions. Make sure my computer's going to respond. There we go. All right, so we're going to cover some basics on BMAPs. What do they contain? A little bit of background. Then we're going to dive in deep into the 2025 BMAP update. And then we'll save a little time at the end for what's next. I will pause in between the sections to see if you have questions on the things that I presented. So I hope to give you a good opportunity throughout and then also at the end. All right. So let's talk about the components of BMAPs. The BMAP identifies strategies to reduce sources of pollution in a basin to achieve the total maximum daily load for that water body. Regardless of the type of BMAP, the plans all contain some similar elements. They discuss the geographic area and specific TMDLs that are being addressed, sources of nutrients, projects that reduce pollutant loading, and assessment of progress toward meeting the water quality standards through different avenues, such as monitoring and project reporting. BMAPs also feature an analysis or mechanism to address future growth impacts. Overall, the main framework of BMAPs consists of 2 parts: the projects identified to achieve pollutant reductions, and the process that will be followed to monitor and assess progress toward meeting the TMDL. So the Alafia River BMAP was initially adopted in 2014, and then in 2025 was updated with an effective date of June 27 of 2025. The Alafia BMAP addresses nutrient and fecal coliform TMDLs. Those TMDLs are in the Alafia River tidal segment, Turkey Creek, Mustang Ranch Creek, English Creek, 30 Mile Creek, and Poley Creek. You'll notice that some of the TMDLs, like English Creek, do not have a waste load allocation for wastewater because the wastewater was not a source when the TMDL was developed. So in 2024, in preparation for the updates, DEP reviewed the water quality assessment data to guide next steps. According to the 2022-2024 assessments, Turkey Creek, Mustang Ranch Creek, English Creek, and Poley Creek do not attain the standard for fecal indicator bacteria E. coli. Mustang Ranch Creek attains the total nitrogen target, but is not attaining the total phosphorus TP standard. More bioassessments are planned to determine if this water body meets the numeric nutrient criteria. 30 Mile Creek does not exceed the NNC for TN. More bioassessments are planned here as well. The TMDL targets for the Alafaya River above Hillsborough Bay, the tidal segment, were set originally to match the Tampa Bay Hillsborough Bay segment at 0.65 milligrams per liter TN. Based on the DEP 2022-24 water quality assessments, the Alafaya River above Hillsborough Bay did not meet NNC for chlorophyll A, nor TN, and does not attain the DO saturation standard. However, the long-term average of annual means for total phosphorus did not exceed the criterion from 2015 to 21, and it's not impaired. Moving on to the Manatee map. Similarly, the initial adoption was in 2014, and it was updated in 2025 with an effective date of June 27, 2025. The Manatee River map addresses nutrient and fecal coliform TMDLs also. They're in the Rattlesnake Slough, Cedar Creek, Nonsense Creek, Braden River above Evers Reservoir, and with this update, the addition of Gilly Creek. According to the 22-24 assessments, the following results were observed. Rattlesnake Slough attains the DO saturation standard. Linear vegetation surveys, also known as LVS, were performed at 2 sites in November of 22. 1 site passed and 1 site failed. Additional bioassessments will be performed to determine the attainment status of the applicable numeric nutrient criteria, NNC. Rattlesnake Slough did not meet the standard for fecal indicator bacteria E. coli. Cedar Creek, a class 1 water body, did not meet the standard for fecal indicator bacteria E. coli. Nonsense Creek attained the DO saturation standard, and similar to the Rattlesnake Slough LVS were performed at 2 sites in November of 22. 1 passed, 1 failed. The additional bioassessments will be performed to determine the attainment status of the applicable NNC. Nonsense Creek is a class 1 water body and did not meet the standard for E. coli. Braden River above Evers Reservoir met the standard for E. coli, which is pretty awesome. And Gilly Creek did not meet the standard for E. coli. And as I said before, this TMDL is now added to the Manatee River BMAP. Moving on, stakeholders. So in the context of the BMAP, there are different organizations named in the plan. Responsible entities are those organizations who are assigned load reductions and must comply with the BMAP provisions. These organizations are sometimes referred to as lead entities. Responsible agencies may be accountable. I'm sorry, I said that really kind of blurry. The next category is responsible agencies, and they may be accountable for reducing loads from their own activities or have an important public sector role in BMAP implementation, such as regulatory oversight, monitoring, research, or other related duties. Interested stakeholders are those organizations that have engaged with the BMAP development and implementation with the intention to influence the implementation process and outcomes. Stakeholders is a more general term often used in the BMAP context to include all 3 of these previously mentioned organizations: responsible entities, responsible agencies, and interested stakeholders. And that's it for the background. I'd like to stop here and see if you have any questions. Okay, I don't hear any, and so if I missed it, interrupt me. Uh-oh, it's super duper quiet on my end. Could you get closer to the mic?
You just come up and use this mic, maybe it'll be easier for them to hear you online.
If you could just quickly
That's
ask-
amazing. Yes, try that.
talk about the attainment status for, I didn't catch it, for English Creek and 30 Mile Creek.
Anita, the request is, can you go back and talk about the attainment status for 30 Mile Creek and English Creek?
Okay, sure. Okay, so English Creek did not attain the E. coli standard. Let me see about 30 Mile. 30 Mile it did not exceed the NNC threshold for TN, but more bioassessments are planned because I think we need more data there to truly understand it. for 30 Mile.
Thank you.
Yep.
Are there any other questions in the room? I think you're good to go.
All right, great. Ooh, let me get caught up. Okay. So here are some of the components that went into the 2025 nutrient-focused BMAP updates that were adopted with an effective date of June 27th, 2025. Have you heard that date a couple of times now? Because I keep saying it on purpose. They're effective as of June 27, 2025. All right, we'll briefly walk through the document and highlight the updated sections. Updates touch on management strategies, future growth, incorporation of legislative requirements, evaluation of relationships between nitrogen loads and water quality, and the use of empirical data in LFI's title segment. The update components also include the expansion of the BMAP boundaries, OSTDS requirements, and effluent limits for domestic wastewater facilities and reuse. You'll see here are the sections of the document. We're going to work through section by section. All right, for section 1, it's a review of the TMDLs and BMAP process. And it includes the expansion of the BMAP boundary. The BMAP now includes the entire Alafia River watershed, and the outer boundaries match the Alafia section of the Tampa Bay Estuary Reasonable Assurance Plan. You'll see the whole plan is, or what's visible within this screenshot or this view is shown in orange. The wrap is orange. The BMAP boundary is the dark black outline. The same is true with the expansion of the Manatee River BMAP. The full Manatee River watershed is now the BMAP boundary, and the outer edges match up with the Tampa Bay Estuary Reasonable Assurance Plan. The whole thing is shown in orange, and then what was I going to tell you? I believe that's it. Yes. So that's pretty big news to have the full expansion there. All right. As noted, is this the right slide? I'm so sorry. As noted earlier when we reviewed the TMDLs, section 2 covers the current water quality data and impairment statuses. So I'm not going to go over those again right now, but that is in section 2. Because of the requirement for allocations in Alafia, we also checked empirical data for relationships between TN loading and chlorophyll A and determined that the system is very dynamic, concluding that the allocations in the RAP should continue to be the allocations for this region. Meanwhile, we are evaluating the best course of action specific to the nutrient TMDLs in both BMAPs. Section 3 is discussing the milestones. This is a new legislative requirement of House Bill 1379. Entities must provide a list of projects and strategies to DEP that show how they will meet their required reductions to achieve the upcoming BMAP milestone. As we said before, allocations for the Tampa Bay region are set by the RAP. DEP recognizes, though, that additional evaluations are going to be needed to determine whether the nutrient TMDLs will be achieved using RAP allocations. If that is not the case, DEP will make allocation adjustments in future BMAP iterations. Additionally, DEP will reevaluate and, if necessary, adopt another iteration of the BMAP, of each of the BMAPs, if necessary. Along this process, we will consult with you all during the process to evaluate and determine appropriate next steps for both of these BMAPs. Okay. So responsible entities, which are estimated to be loading above their allocated allowable load, will need to provide projects to reduce their loading and must submit a sufficient list of projects to DEP by January 14th of 2026 to be compliant with the upcoming BMAP milestone. I would like to say that everyone's looking really good here, and we know that one of these has an anomaly in it due to kind of an off year that take out the off year and the numbers look a lot better. So if anyone has any questions, we can come back to this a little bit later. Listed below are project types to reduce nutrient loading, which we think of in two ways: those reductions to current loading sources and looking forward to the addition of increased future loading. So current and future. For that, preventative measures should be planned and implemented. We've already summarized the history of the BMAP, and looking forward, next is the 2026 deadline for entities to submit their plans or actions to meet allocations and actions to ensure the new requirements will be met on time. Under House Bill 1379, responsible entities are now required to have projects submitted to DEP, which are expected to meet each 5-year milestone. And because of this legislative update, the list of actions to meet milestones in STAR 2025, meaning specific project identification efforts, must be submitted by January 14th of 26. So it's coming right up. And I guess we can pause here for questions on what I've shown so far.
Questions?
I think I just want to mention for clarity, some of these topics have been discussed by, this is just giving a little bit of background to these were discussions of the consortium prior. The reasonable assurance plan was developed with in-bay water quality conditions in mind. So those allocations were developed for the Hillsborough Bay segment, Old Tampa Bay, Middle Tampa Bay. As these BMAPs have been developed, there's been additional allocations and load reductions required in smaller spatial areas. And now we've been, with these updates, in conversation with the department, identifying how to move forward to create some nexus between the regional assurance plan and these new BMAP updates. So that's why we invited Anita to kind of give this presentation today. I know some of you kind of were looking lost, so I just want to provide that additional context of why we're actually talking about this.
Thanks, Ed.
I don't see any questions in the room right now, Nita.
All right, thank you. Just so you guys know, it's super hard for me to hear the microphone at the podium. So if I don't respond appropriately, it might be because I misheard something. All right, let's see here. So let's dig in. Section 4 of the new BMAP update document. It is about management actions and goes over the bills and legislative updates that had to be rolled into the nutrient BMAPs. It also covers management actions by source and shares a future growth analysis to help give everyone an idea of what could be coming and how to plan appropriately. Wastewater. The Clean Waterways Act of 2020 required local governments within a nutrient BMAP to develop wastewater treatment plans and/or OSTDS remediation plans. Projects identified in these plans are incorporated into the project tables. Reclaimed water in Senate Bill 64 of 2021 requires domestic wastewater utilities that dispose of effluent, reclaimed water, or reuse water by surface water discharge to submit for DEP review and approval a plan for eliminating non-beneficial surface water discharge by January 1st of 2032. If a plan was not timely submitted or approved by DEP, the utility's domestic wastewater treatment facilities may not dispose of effluent, reclaimed water, or reuse water by surface water discharge after January 2028. The Environmental Protection House Bill 1379 of 2023 requires facilities discharging to a water body impaired for nutrients or subject to a BMAP to upgrade to AWT within 10 years. It requires applicants for new septic systems serving lots of 1 acre or less within BMAPs to connect to central sewer if it's available. And if it's unavailable, this is new. It requires applicants to install an enhanced nutrient reducing system or other wastewater system that achieves a nitrogen reduction of 65%. So it's a pretty big requirement that was rolled in. It's a big part of the reason that BMAPs were updated. All right, here's the wastewater effluent limits shown in these tables were also part of the updates. Nitrogen and phosphorus effluent limits will be applied as an annual average taken at the end of pipe before any land disposal. The limits are based on facility capacity and disposal method. For example, if you look at surface water discharges, and the requirements were all need to be down to 3 milligrams per liter TN or better and 1 milligram per liter TP. For facilities that have multiple disposal methods, but only one treatment path, the strictest effluent limit of the facility's disposal types should be implemented. And we ruled in requirements of House Bill 1557, which was in 2024. It requires advanced treatment of reclaimed water within BMAPs. It also, as all responsible entities with wastewater treatment facilities providing reuse in the Alafaya BMAP are currently achieving their allocations per the final Tampa Bay 2022 wrap update. DEP determined that no wastewater treatment facilities providing reclaimed water within the Alafaya are contributing to the nutrient impairments. Facilities providing reuse in Manatee BMAP are also subject to the 3 milligrams per liter of TN and 1 milligram per liter of TP AWT effluent standards that were shown on the previous slide. In the future, current or newly permitted reclaimed water from wastewater treatment facilities in either basin may be determined to cause or contribute to nutrient impairments and will be required to treat to AWT standards or an alternative treatment standard if necessary. These lists are in the BMAP. They are initial lists of facilities with domestic wastewater disposal sites within the boundaries of the BMAPs. All right, then another source type that we address in the update is biosolids. To provide assurance that nitrogen losses to surface water and groundwater are minimized from the permitted application of biosolids and septage in the BMAP, requirements in accordance with Chapter 62-640 of Florida Administrative Code apply to newly permitted application sites and existing application sites upon permit renewal. Okay, so stormwater. Ken Weaver, our Deputy Division Director, has been involved with developing the stormwater rule. And so Ken's going to actually walk you through the next 2 slides. Over to you, Ken. Let me know when I need to change the slide.
Sure, thanks, Anita. Yeah, and by that, I work with the Division of Water Resource Management, kind of in developing the stormwater rule. They definitely have the expertise, but yeah, so I wanted to talk a little bit about these slides, and I had asked Anita to put a little more information in than we've done in our standard BMAP slides, just because Tampa Bay is unique, and there's some other things going on that we don't always have to concern ourselves with. But so the stormwater rule, which is in Chapter 62-330, was ratified by the Florida legislature because there was a cost associated with this. We had to take that rule to the legislature to be ratified. It was ratified on June 28th, 2024. And kind of like the previous stormwater rule, it has requirements about post stormwater project conditions for the pollutant of concern being better than or equal to the pre-development condition. That still exists. What's new and really helps strengthen some of our programs, and we think will benefit BMAPs and other things, are some of the performance-based standards. Now, part of that ratification did delay kind of grandfathered in permits that existed for stormwater until December 28, 2025. But these performance standards that I'll talk about briefly are going to go into effect after that date. So the end of this year, really into next year. So the first slide here, it talks about the updated performance standards, the 80% reduction in TP and 50% reduction of TN. That's relative to the, so stormwater project comes in, gets the environmental resource permit, and they have to demonstrate that through their actions or potentially some water quality trading, that the result of what's coming off the project is 80% reduction in TP and 55% for TN. Now that's the base requirement. There are some specific requirements. Go to the next slide, Anita, please. That kind of get picked up. And if you're in if your water body, the stormwater project is discharging to a HUC 12, so a sub-watershed that contains an impaired water body, then impaired water bodies by definition also include those that have TMDLs or a RAP in this case. So that's why I brought it up. In those cases, anything that's discharging within that HUC 12 that goes to the RAP boundary has this first bullet that talks about reducing TP and TN by 80% relative to the pre-project condition. And then I also thought it was important to put in here is that if there's a HUC 12, if the HUC 12 subwatershed discharges into an outstanding Florida water, and remember parts of Pinellas County, Tampa Bay are outstanding Florida water, then the required reductions are 95%. So permittees need to pay attention to the HUC 12, where they're discharging to figure out what the performance criteria are. But again, this is a real strengthening of that rule. And I can see in Tampa Bay where, some of these other provisions are going to start kicking in, there's going to be even some greater reductions. Anita, that's all I really wanted to say about the stormwater rule. So I'll hand it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Okay, moving on to sports turf grass and golf courses. Sporting facilities are required in the 25 update to follow the 2025 sports turf BMP manual. Additionally, all publicly owned golf courses within the BMAP must obtain a certification for golf course BMPs under 403.9339 Florida statutes, and all golf courses must implement the BMPs described in the 2021 DEP Golf Course BMP Manual. Additionally, golf courses located within a BMAP are required to submit a nutrient management plan. Agriculture. This isn't really new, except that the agricultural requirements of the BMAPs now apply to the whole basin. So most of this falls under FDAC's authority and responsibility. But in addition to them, confined animal feeding operations, CAFOs, are permitted by DEP, and the Florida Forest Service implements Chapter 51-6 Florida Administrative Code and requires both private and public forest landowners across the state to comply with BMPs and the rule. Section 403.067 Florida statute requires DACs, DEP, and agricultural producers to work together to establish ACEs, which is Agricultural Cooperative Regional Elements. DACS is responsible for providing DEP a list of projects, which in combination with BMPs and other management strategies will achieve the needed pollutant load reductions established for agricultural non-point sources. DACS is assigned the lead role on project solicitation, development, selection, and implementation. However, they will work closely with all the key stakeholders, including DEP as a partner agency, to define and identify regional projects that will be included in the BMAP. DACS is responsible for reporting on the projects annually through the DEP STAR process and during BMAP updates or development. Within a year after this BMAP adoption, which happened earlier this year, DEP will reevaluate the non-point source contributions in the expanded BMAP area and determine whether an ACE will be required in these BMAPs with the expansion of the BMAP boundary. Atmospheric deposition. Atmospheric sources of nutrients are local, national, and international. No specific nitrogen or phosphorus reductions were assigned to this source category in these BMAPs. According to Hines and Dawson in 2017, the emission of nitrogen has been generally decreasing in Florida due to power plant fuel source changes, air treatment upgrades, and increased use of electric vehicles. Atmospheric deposition sources and trends will be reevaluated periodically. Future growth. DEP ran 3 management scenarios to look at loading by entity, source, and overall basin. This broad analysis is not being used to determine allocated reductions for responsible entities because it does not capture all the local considerations and complexities of mixed land use or current allocation approaches for wastewater. We compared 3 scenarios. We said, what if protective measures are in place for new population by 2040? And as compared to lesser protective measures. So the 3 scenarios are kind of step downs. We have the most protective, the middle level protection, and the least protective measures in order to just kind of gain a general sense what it would look like. So the first category that we evaluated as part of the scenarios was, what if new population is connected to central sewer at either 90%, which is a fairly protective rate, or the same rate as today, which is a lot less in some areas. The next category we looked at in this evaluation was all wastewater being treated to either 3 total milligrams per liter total nitrogen, or the last category is 6. And then remainder of new population, we compared as either having enhanced OSTDS or as installing conventional OSTDS. And lastly, we looked at the undeveloped land, how much of it could be converted to low density development and how that would affect things. So what if only 2% of the undeveloped land was converted to low density development as compared to 10 or 17%? While it is unlikely that additional nutrient loading from future populations can be entirely avoided, the results of this analysis provide local governments an example of the thoughts that should be put into planning and realizing the ramifications of decisions. In every scenario, additional loading is expected in the basin by 2040 due to increasing populations. This example is intended to show that entities should be working now to both remediate existing loading and plan to mitigate loading from future growth. As I said earlier, this was just a very general, broad analysis, and it is not being used to determine allocations. Do we have any questions for the materials that we covered since our last question session?
You guys got nothing? I don't see any takers in the room.
Okie doke. We can keep moving.
I have a question.
All right.
Okay.
It's around Pinellas County. I was wondering on the specific section with the sports turf and golf courses.
Yes.
That part of the sports turf facilities requiring to follow sports turf BMPs. Is that only for BMAP areas or is that statewide?
So it's not statewide.
Okay.
It
It's just
is
for
in
BMAPs.
BMAPs, but I don't know. I think it's just BMAPs. I don't believe it extends to the RAP, but I'm
And
not an
you know where
expert
to
on
find that manual? I couldn't locate it just searching online.
Let's see here. I'm pretty sure it's on our BMAP page. We have resources, but I would have to defer to Moira to confirm that.
Okay, I could look there.
Okay.
Thank you.
And if you're welcome. If you can't find it later on, let me know and I'll be happy to get you linked up on email.
All right, thank you.
Sure thing.
I've got a question. Simon Bolin with Hillsborough County. Maybe a stupid question. Did anybody do a cost analysis on this? Because if private homeowners are having to put in advanced water treatment systems for their septic systems, if farms are having to pump out their lagoons and then put in concrete or geotech liners, one, they need to pump their lagoons out and need to get the permits to do that. And two, to get them completely empty. And then two, they have to pay for an expensive liner to put in. So it has anybody run a cost analysis on any of these upgrades?
So I'm not aware of any, but I also am not certain of how the decisions were made to put these requirements into legislation and then, or just the B maps. So.
Well, that might be something somebody wants to do.
I would like to say though that along with all of these requirements, that funding for a lot of different things has now become increased and continues to become increased as communities start putting more needs into the STAR, the statewide annual report. We have a question in the portal that asks, is this funded or not? And so that should help with decision-making and allocations. And then I would suggest also a lot of communities are looking for assistance through grants to help the homeowners upgrade where needed or connect.
Thank you.
Sure. And Moida or Ken, did you have anything you want to add to that? Okay. Do we have any more questions?
I don't see any more questions in the room, Anita.
Okay. All right. Let me find where we were. Slide 34. We did this. No, keep going. Oh, yes, I believe this is where we were. 35. Okay, section 5 talks about the monitoring network and monitoring strategies. Section 6 is a general comment about commitment and plan to the plan implementation. And then in the appendices, we have a list of important links. So some of the questions you asked, they probably, you could go to the important links list and find a lot of materials you're wanting to see. Also, the project tables are in the appendices. We have examples of management strategies, which are meant to help local governments figure out what they should be addressing in the statewide annual report to show that they're going to be preparing for the new requirements that are in the BMAP as far as moving forward with how things will be managed with growth and such, and also remediation. And then the golf course nutrient management plan, there's an example and information on it in the appendices. And FDAX provides us an agricultural enrollment, which we show in the appendices as well. Next steps. All right. So over the next few years, DEP will gather more bioassessment data in the nutrient TMDL water bodies for both of the BMAPs, and we'll compare that to the NNC and determine needs. And during that, if water quality results indicate a need for additional restoration measures, DEP is considering applying the RAP model to explore whether additional reductions may be needed in the LFI BMAP, for example. Model updates could include updating the relevant jurisdictional boundaries, clipping to the TMDL watersheds, and assessing current loading estimates. Other evaluations probably would make sense as well, and we will consult with you all during the process to evaluate and determine appropriate next steps for both of these BMAPs. I can't stress that enough. We want to make sure that the direction we're going, it makes sense with you all as well, and that, you know, if there's something we're missing, we want to know. All right, this is the slide that shows you the BMAP website resources, and in there you can find the story maps about each of the BMAPs. It gives you links to the project tables. It also has a link to the statewide annual report. That's where we show all the commitments that have been submitted to each year and prior years updates and such. So if you would like to receive emails about when the portal, so the portal is that little screenshot on the right side, that's where each entity is going to go to upload their project commitments. If you need to be added to the mailing list for that so that you know when it opens and when it closes and any other fun facts during that time period, let me know and I'll add you to the mailing list for the portal. It is, and the STAR is published each year by July 1st. For the BMAP section of the STAR, it covers updates for the prior year. So July 1st of this year, the STAR covered BMAP updates between project updates, I should say, from January 1st through December 31st of 2024. So you can see it at the link there at the bottom. And that is what we were hoping to cover. Now we'd like to open it up for more questions. Comments, not like formal comments, because just any thoughts?
I had a question. I wasn't able to raise my hand. Peter,
Okay.
Applied Sciences. When you say you're going to clip something to a B map, does that mean you're going to expand that basin and make it part of the B map? What does that mean?
No, what I meant by that was that let's say if when we evaluate each of the TMDLs against the current allocations and see if we need to be more specific in a smaller region, maybe let's say, if the watershed contributing to a TMDL contains part of a city, for example, we wouldn't include the entire city in that. We would cut the portion of the city that contributes to that TMDL water body and assign a loading based on just that portion of that city to the city.
So that's based on its, I guess, drainage map boundaries,
Most likely, yes.
or discharge boundaries. Oh, okay. Okay. Well, I'm glad there's a lot of experts on it. Thank you.
It's nice to work with the experts, yes.
And again, just chime in. There has been a process to develop basically aggregated allocations to each of the major base segments to the municipalities and the entities represented in the room. And as Anita suggested, that if we're looking at smaller scale water bodies where these TMDLs have been established and the BMAPs have been updated, then how we disaggregate those allocations to those smaller water body IDs is sort of the next steps that DEP is looking at. And again, trying to create some nexus in terms of what has been developed through the regional assurance plan and the downstream waters that those allocations were developed for in the bay proper versus those smaller water body IDs up in the watershed where there are existing TMDLs. And that's what we're trying to work with the department to kind of create that nexus, that one-to-one linkage between the two. And that hasn't been done yet, but that's sort of the process that Anita is alluding to as sort of the next steps of these BMAP updates. And along those lines, I think we're also, and this is just a comment, Anita, that, we'll probably work with the department to ensure that, we have access to the STAR reporting that is conducted as part of these BMAPs and make sure we're folding in those projects that have already been reported by the entities into the regional assurance plan update that we're preparing and we'll submit to the department by 2027. So there'll be a little bit of overlap in terms of the reporting through the STAR system versus what we now are going to be reporting through the RAP. But we try to minimize any duplication of effort in terms of that reporting effort by each of the entities represented in this room.
So, Ed, I'll speak up loudly. Hopefully Anita can hear me. But this kind of like getting like these smaller scale load allocations, like you said, you called it a nexus between those and those that are in the Tampa Bay reasonable assurance document. What is that process? Is that something that the consortium is going to need to step up and kind of facilitate, or is that something that will be done between DEP and individual entities? And then maybe a question for DEP, if there is not agreement between those smaller scales and what's currently in the Tampa Bay, are you talking about ratcheting down what's in the estuarine allocations?
Yeah. Do you want me to start, Anita?
Yes, please.
So going way back in our Wayback Machine to about 2009, this same question started popping up when we were developing allocations for the entire bay. And as TMDLs were starting to be developed, there was the question of which takes precedent, the allocations developed through the RAP or allocations developed through smaller TMDLs omitted. I think there's been some preliminary guidance. There was some preliminary guidance. So this is going back to like a decision memo from those early 2010s that haven't been formalized, I would say, by an official position of either us or the department. But if you think about it, usually the lower allocation would take precedent. And that would be sort of what is required of that entity if they're represented in both the smaller WIBID as well as the larger RAP. That is sort of the guiding principle for achieving a TMDL that has been established for those different water bodies. That has not been formalized in any sort of response from decision memos. That's just been conjecture and sort of discussions that have happened through this body in the Nitrogen Management Consortium. And that's what I think we need to work through over the course of this reasonable assurance plan update and now in sort of combination with these recent BMAP updates. There is a process that we've developed loads to all 7 major sources in the watershed. Those RAP models, as Anita suggested, are, I think, what the department might rely upon in the future to potentially look at allocations at those smaller spatial scales. But that's additional work that we're probably going to have to work with the department through the estuary program and the consortium and our consultant working on that on behalf of the Nitrogen Management Consortium. There's a process that we've identified called geographic discretization, which took the larger bay segment loads for each entity and then disaggregated those loads to each of the municipalities. But again, that was at the bay segment level. It wasn't at a smaller scale to these impaired WIBIDs or a BMAP area. And that's sort of the nexus we kind of need to work through with the department moving forward. I don't know if that covered it enough, Anita, or if you wanted to chime in at all, but that's sort of my perception of where we're at with it.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that also we are gathering additional information through biological monitoring in the freshwater TMDLs for the freshwater nutrient TMDL areas. So don't jump too far ahead into we're making those allocations right now, because we want to make sure that it's the appropriate next step before we do.
Yeah, I think as part of the RAP process, I mean, the water quality takes precedent. If we're meeting water quality standards in some of those WIBIDs, then these sort of finer scale allocations, delineations may not be necessary in the future.
Correct. Did that answer the questions that were asked before you spoke, Ed? I'm sorry, because I couldn't hear the entire question set.
Smiling.
Okay.
The outline of a letter is forming in my head, asking for more clarity.
Well, I think you'd like their continued involvement and co-production of whatever that process is.
Well,
Yes.
look, I think, this group generally goes where the science goes. So I think as long as the DEP is collecting the right information and, I think is an important thing for the estuary program as a whole, right? That role in terms of accepted science. So I don't think anybody's going to argue allocations that are based on good science, right? It's more of a process issue. The one thing I did hear that I was a little bit concerned about, Ed, and maybe I don't want to put words in your mouth, but we've been talking for the last number of meetings about potentially reopening the RA document to address whole Tampa Bay. I thought what I heard you say is that we would use that opportunity now to address other changes in allocations to align with the updated BMAPs where those are applicable. Is that what you said?
Yeah, I don't think so. And that if it came out that way, I don't think that's what I was alluding to. I think this is more of making sure that the allocations developed in the RAP in some way linked to the BMAPs that have been updated. And at this point, I think the recommendations and some of the additional science that we've developed are focused entirely on Old Tampa Bay, and we're not suggesting any changes for the other bay segments at this point, based on achieving water quality and good seagrass results in those bay segments. Yeah. Yeah.
I walk up to, as I shorten the mic. All right, no. Just gonna- All right. Hi, Anita. This is Alyssa Powers with Manatee County. Can you hear
Hi.
me?
Yes, I hear you well. Thank you. How are you?
Okay. So given this discussion on gathering additional information and the loading characteristics for the Alafaya and Manatee River that remain unanswered, what is the level for the project list and management strategies that will satisfy this first January 2026 requirement? Because we're in different fiscal cycles. A lot of it, as you know, will probably be unfunded, and we don't want to go too far down a strategy and then find out from the actual data that that's not the direction to take. That would be a lot of time and
Correct.
effort expended
Yes.
when we just really want to get to the loading characteristics and the actual ambient water quality monitoring to really assess what's going on in these.
Totally
TMP.
agree. So, and Moida, please, if I miss something or I misrepresent something, I invite Moida and Ken to step in and interrupt me. This initial project gathering is really more focused on management strategies. And I would suggest that for most of it, it's going to be all the new legislative requirements looking forward. So if you go through those House bills and Senate bills and the requirements in those that affect the county for things like future growth or existing discharges, those are the things that, regardless of the allocations, have to happen. So if you can acknowledge those in a project entry to say, yes, we have an effort to make sure that, you know, everything's going to be compliant and consistent with these requirements, most likely we're going to be like, good, you're aware of it, you understand what's happening, you're planning for it, you know. And as far as like projects that require funding for any kind of remediation that you want to do, I don't think we're looking for any solid commitments right now on that, just because of, like you said, the allocations are under review for what's appropriate, what's necessary. So does that make sense? Is that clear as mud, or?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And just to follow up, we still have not seen that 2025 sports turf grass BMP manual or the link to it. Doesn't seem to be on the website yet.
Okay.
Hi, this is Moira, and that is
There she is.
entirely my fault. So that is in the works. Stay tuned on that. We do have it. We just need to link it on there.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Before
Alyssa.
Anita tries to play it off as, you know, she's somehow responsible for that. It's all me.
Thanks, thanks, Moira.
I don't see any other questions in the room. I just want to really express my gratitude that you're willing to come and talk to the group and answer the questions that we did have. So thank you for that, Anita.
Thank you so much for reaching out and continuing to include us in the invites. If we'd have had more specifics to give you guys earlier, we would have been here earlier.
We
But
understand.
we were rolling in the new requirements and figuring them out as the deadline was approaching. And so, like I said, we're committed to communicating with you guys more and coordinating more with you all in the future as we try to make sure that whatever next milestones are required are something that you all understand and are in agreement with the process that we reached, how we got there.
Okay. Oh, did you have something, Michelle? All right. All right.
Thank you.
Next presentation from Kevin O'Donnell with EEP and the response to our decision memo of 2017.
So as you all recall, we've been through this long process of trying to collect information and understand what's really driving some of the challenges that we're observing in Old Tampa Bay. And you've continued to work with us, and we crafted this decision memo, which was really ended up being a series of questions that you all had about how the department and how EPA might handle an alternative approach that we have been sort of starting to think through as a group. And so what we've done today is asked primarily the Department of Environmental Protection to come sort of walk through what their responses are. We've also invited EPA, and we've shared both the letters with you on the agenda. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Kevin and let y'all walk through what your thinking was and the decision memo that we submitted to you guys. Do you have anything you need to share, or is just your picture?
Yeah, it's just my scary face. I think that'll do for today.
That's great. That's perfect.
So no presentation for me, but thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk. And
You want us to put up the response on the screen?
yeah, that'd be great if you wanted to do that. I was gonna ask if I could just walk through them or kind of give the highlights, but it's probably better to walk through each of them. Thank you, Ed. So just a little overview. So just to reintroduce myself, I'm Kevin O'Donnell. I'm the program administrator of our water quality evaluation and TMDL program. And so in developing our responses, which came from the DEER Division of Environmental Assessment Restoration, we did coordinate with different DEP divisions from our, including our Southwest DEP district from the phosphate group, as well as getting information from our MS4 staff or staff that are in there that are here in Tallahassee. So we try to coordinate and get responses that were clear and had been reviewed by multiple programs. So I'll just walk through them, and if you guys don't know the question, I'm not going to read each one of them, but basically in detail. Well, the first one was just reviewing, would we be DEP and EPA be willing to review the assimilative capacity project? And the simple answer is yes. We did review it, and we did provide feedback on a couple instances to Ed and Maya. And in the first one, really, we kind of just on two different occasions. So back in November, on November 5th, we provided some input, and just really we're providing support on the process and the findings of the assimilative capacity study. Now acknowledging that attaining the TN load of 46 tons per year without the hydrologic normalization it could be beneficial to Old Tampa Bay. And then just looking into the other projects that were provided for TN reductions within Lake Tarpon, and as well as oyster reef projects that could be beneficial. And then lastly, just noting that we did, looking at other projects that within stormwater projects that could be coming from Moccasin Creek and other primary contributing basins that come into Old Tampa Bay, like watershed. And in the second email that were just follow up that we sent November 3rd, sorry, thanks for going back.
You're good.
We just provided a support again, but also responding some of the more detailed questions that Ed had about what would the process look like, the administrative process for, has it been done before? Are there other loading based expressions of the estuary criteria that are like that? And the answer is yes. Then what steps are needed to be revised, not only through the RAP, which would be kind of new because we hadn't always adopted criteria through a RAP. So that'd be a first time for that, but that is, the secretary would sign off on that procedure, but then, and then sending it to EPA as a change to water quality standards would still need to be required. So there's those administrative steps. Then we would still come back and want to clean up chapter 62.302, the water quality standards rule, to update the table for estuary nutrient criteria since it's in that as well. And those would take additional steps to the ERC, as well as sending to EPA as a change to water quality standards. So we kind of outlined that in an email back in November 3rd of 2024. So, okay, the next one, I have to go down now. So would we as DEP speaking here, support re-expression of the TN NNC as an absolute load? If it was justified while keeping the other base segments unchanged? Our answer here, I've been rereading it today, is a little nuanced because yes, we would, because it's really, it's stakeholder driven, you know, to what your criteria you think is protective of the designated use. As long as it meets that requirement as protective of the designated use, yes, we would want to move forward with that. The second part says we kind of think that ideally maybe it's a better method to look at all of them, you know, all of the base segments for consistency. And so that is something that you guys could evaluate, but it doesn't mean that you can't change one without changing all, just to say that. And I'll also add that in addition to total nitrogen, since the estuary nutrient criteria is for total phosphorus as well, having those two be consistent is important. Yeah. Okay, yeah, want to go to the next one? We're on 3, yeah. So some of the, I think legal implications here, I think the question is about what happens for, I don't know if you guys meant the allocations to entities or the legal steps that we go to. And rather than legal steps, I'd say that is what is the administrative process to go through? And that's kind of what we answered. What's the administrative steps? And I kind of talked about that already, about secretarial adoption, EPA's approval as a change to standards, things like that. So, yeah. And I'll just note, you know, seeing the facilities too, that's something that's also worth talking about. Anything that's has a facility permit or wastewater permit through that, allowing time for an administrative order as needed, you know, when standards change, is not like instantaneously a facility or something like that is going to meet the criteria or their treatment level. And so, you know, being amenable to the fact that it takes time for that. And administrative orders are not new in that regard. So the number 4 one, do we consider development of alternative adaptive compliance that uses the absolute load? This I didn't even finish the question, but it's a little nuanced. We got a little confused with this, to be honest, because there's a lot of questions embedded into one of them. So maybe we can talk about further clarification or follow-up on what was really meant with this question. But I don't know, we can stop there. If Ed or Maya, if you guys have anything you could add to help explain kind of what was going on there.
Yeah, Ed's gonna come up and talk through.
Thank you.
Yeah, the wording for that question is largely my fault, so was very clear, understand that, but I think the gist of it was getting at, if we were not going to go through the process of redefining the numeric nutrient criteria for Old Tampa Bay, is there an alternative management framework that could be developed through the consortium's reasonable assurance process that would kind of substitute in terms of re-expressing the NNC for Old Tampa Bay using an absolute load? That was sort of the gist of it. More of like a voluntary approach to meeting that absolute load through reasonable assurance plan updates and reporting, rather than a formal re-expression of the numeric nutrient criteria.
So I guess my answer is, at the end of the day, we've made progress, coordinating with you guys to get information on the hydrologically normalized for total nitrogen and total phosphorus. We just, but the reporting components of that could be, I'd say it's stakeholder led. So maybe you have more flexibility there, but I'm gonna let you know, Ken's in the office here with me as well, so he'll
Yeah.
chime in.
And I joined Kevin, we thought it'd be more efficient if I had to chime in. So, yeah, I'm trying to, get my head around this alternative framework. There may be a way to set that up where we don't change the NNC, but then there's some framework that the wrap layers on top, which is how they work normally anyways, to demonstrate that we're meeting that NNC. I think at the end of the day, we'd have to show that whatever actions are taken by the consortium are going to, at the end of the day, meet that standard because that's the goal. But there may be ways of doing that. If you get an alternative expression, part of the reason why we kind of packaged our numeric nutrient criteria in the way we did was so you don't have different endpoints, different thresholds for different purposes. So that'd be something we'd have to look at. Is it going to cause any confusion? But there may be a way to structure that. Is the short answer. But we, as we usually say, the devil's in the details. So we can investigate that option.
Yeah, and I think we could come back with some additional clarity and formalize it here too.
And I'll just add, we some of these later questions talk about the reassessment and compliance, and I'll just preliminary say, like, the chlorophyll assessment is different than what is provided each year. You guys may look at the individual station level and looking whether it exceeds the target, and that's different than what we do for the impaired waters rule. And we're making progress towards getting closer to being in sync with that. And so that's good. Meaning the uncorrected versus uncorrected. So that's part of the trying review revisions that we're implementing. Yeah. So yeah, building on question 5, then I don't know if there's more to talk about with that one, but compliance really is, I don't think there's ever been an issue with the Tampa Estuary Program and the NYCHA Consortium meeting the compliance components because it's a 5-year update. I don't think that would change. You guys always meet that. And the annual updates that we get on the status of projects and chlorophyll concentrations and things like that. And monitoring components. It still meets the elements that both DEP but EPA has for the 9 element of a watershed management plan. Nothing's changed there. Yeah, I think that answers 5, 6, and 7, to be honest with you. Yeah, so and I saw on the agenda earlier that it was also EPA's response, and for those that didn't know, like EPA also did provide a response letter August 12th. And so, their input is always valuable. We coordinate with them when updates happen to ensure that things are in compliance still. And that, as you know, the reasonable assurance plans are stakeholder led. And so this component would also require, changes were made. I've explained it already, but it requires, when there's changes to standards, there's both the 303C component that EPA would have to review and approve as a change of standard, but then also the 303D listing side of things, which is where the category 4B in the reasonable assurance plan gets recognized also for the 303D list. So I know I went through that quickly, but any specific questions or things I can try to clarify?
Yeah, Stacy, you want to come up here so they can hear you, or I can repeat your questions to you?
Either way.
Come on.
Okay, so,
You want to do it.
Hey Kevin, this is Stacy Day with Pinellas County. Just out of curiosity, I was wondering how this, like a re-adoption of the RAP would compare to a SAC? Like, is it, like, I don't know how are they similar? Would it be a similar process?
I'll use Ken's line, the devil's in the details. There wouldn't be, the reasonable assurance plan doesn't have money exchange, in terms of the checks, $15,000 and things like that, but the SAC does still require, depending on what kind of SAC it is, let's go to the ERC.
Yeah. Well, okay. So this RAP is purely secretarial order. We don't have to go to ERC. It's not a rulemaking in that sense. And you know, there's similarities in both because it would be a change of standards, which is an open public process. So, you know, talking about the process, we'd have to have public meetings where we highlight the fact that we're making the changes. That's common to both of them. There would have to be a hearing at some point where you give people a 45-day notice on the change. Again, that would be common. I think where the difference lies is the SAC. There's different kinds of SACs that have to go different routes. But as Kevin was picking up, in our rules, there is a fee associated with the SAC. It's $15,000 per SAC. That does not exist for RAP. So that's another difference. I mean, but then again, we're still kind of thinking internally a little bit about the timing. If this were to happen, how the standards change would relate to the RAP change. So there is, as Kevin was quoting me, the devil is in the details. You know, we've got to work some details out, but you know, the bigger difference is the fee I think is the biggest difference here.
Okay.
Do we have a question that, oh, Jan's got a couple of questions. Jan McLean has a couple of questions in the chat. One is that she's asking for an explanation of the difference between a site-specific alternative criteria and a reasonable assurance plan. And so I'll let you start with that one, and then we'll go to the next question.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so the site-specific alternative criteria is actually sometimes written SSAC versus abbreviating RAP, reasonable assurance plan. So when you have generally applicable criteria, a site-specific alternative criteria is some other number that is scientifically derived and is defensible and protective of the designated use. That basically that change is not going to cause imbalance of flora fauna or, you know, human health criteria, whichever other. I don't know if you can do it for bacteria, really, probably not, but it could be more stringent or it could be less stringent than the generally applicable criteria. So so that's the terminology. And so an example in what is the Sweetwater branch is what comes to mind in Gainesville. It has a site-specific alternative criteria for nutrients and chlorophyll A, different than the stream standard, the generally applicable stream standard. So it could be different expression, you know, no longer the 1 and 3 or the magnitude of the criterion. But there are, you know, somewhat different administrative processes too.
Yeah. And maybe the simplest way to think of it is a SAC is simply a process of changing the applicable water quality criterion for anything. Nutrients is typical or DO for one water body, for an individual water body, just for that water body. The reasonable assurance plan is really it's a restoration plan implemented by local stakeholders, and it has 9 elements that it has to meet. And then in Florida, when we set up a numeric nutrient criteria, we said that you can't use the RAP as a means of changing the nutrient criteria for an individual water body. And sometimes when I was in standards, we call that a site-specific criteria or a specific criteria for that water body versus a site-specific, which has very detailed regulatory requirements. I probably should have just stopped.
And then I think Jan's other question is if you were able to sort of provide any insights about about a legal process that might be triggered, if rather than restating or changing the numeric nutrient criteria for Old Tampa Bay, but instead if we pursued this sort of parallel alternative assessment approach where we sort of said everything stays as it has been for Old Tampa Bay, but we're also going to be reporting on absolute load conditions as sort of like the voluntary kind of approach so that we can keep tabs on that to see if there truly is, you know, an issue and additional work that needs to be done. So if we kind of approached it like that, rather than having a new numeric nutrient criteria, would that from the department's perspective, trigger a different legal process or something that we should be preparing for?
Well, I guess what I would say first is, I mean, first I was gonna answer that, in the coordination and learning more about the Q bells and things, we learned that most of them were absolute loads already. Maybe not all of them, but, I think each step, because of when the secretary signs, as an agency action, chapter 120 is, for a challenge is invoked, and so there's a 21-day challenge period. Changes to water quality standards can be challenged as well. So those are, I think, the legal steps. If someone disagreed and had countervailing information or said it was, not scientifically sound or I don't know, those for whatever their justification is, if there's some kind of burden of proof to go through. But Dan, I don't know I can't think of any more specifics besides what our DEP's typical administrative process is.
And, in full transparency here, so even though the Tampa Bay RAP numbers were adopted as numeric nutrient criteria, that was done as we were adopting the numeric nutrient criteria. We have not yet gone through the administrative process where we use the RAP to change the criteria. So from the start, so we're still kind of figuring out the most efficient approach. And of course, Tampa Bay is on the forefront again, and you're going to help us work through that process. Unless you want to wait for Miami-Dade and Biscayne Bay.
Biscayne Bay is the other option.
Well, I think part of what we're wanting to consider is how amenable y'all might be to not changing anything formally, but just adding additional layer of reporting into the existing reasonable assurance process, if that might still be contributing towards demonstrating that reasonable assurance that we will be working towards attaining water quality standards in Old Tampa Bay.
Yeah.
I think we'd be very interested in that because I think you could get to the same endpoint. I mean, the endpoint we're looking for is to protect Tampa Bay, to restore the seagrass in Old Tampa Bay, and that may be another way without going through all these regulatory hurdles of revising the criteria. And maybe we don't need to. Maybe we just need to watch things a little better and control things. So yeah, we're very much open to that.
Heard. And so Jan is also requesting clarification about whether or not that would, if we added that additional reporting layer, this alternative assessment methodology, that she wants to confirmation that that does not require a secretarial order.
I would say no, I don't think so, because it's all in the reporting through the reasonable assurance plan, like the 5-year update. And I would consider that as the adaptive management of,
I think I'd agree tentatively. I mean, we'd have to see what it looks like, but if it's not changing thresholds, if it's not changing numbers, reporting requirements, allocations, that type of thing, and I think we'd be fine. I mean, we're certainly going to brief up our management team.
Other questions from folks in the room? Certainties or clarifications you'd appreciate from the department? Not seeing any other question. Oh, maybe Tina's got something.
I don't want to go backwards because we started going down this kind of like alternative assessment approach, which I like for a lot of reasons, but mainly more of the administrative and procedural stuff, right? Because like before it gets really complicated. Kevin, you mentioned earlier in the discussion, if there was a change to the actual criteria and that change kind of ultimately ends up that one or more entities are basically going to be immediately out of compliance with that new kind of unadjusted load. You mentioned that it would be wholly appropriate for kind of administrative orders for those entities to come into compliance. When we talked with a lot of those folks that would potentially be affected that way, there was a lot of discussion around typically those orders are limited to like the term of the permit cycle or a 5-year period. Is that something that the department would be, as long as there was some kind of compliance schedule that went over that 5-year period, they would be open to considering?
I think we should double check with, I would think so, but I can't speak for our permit, permit and things like that. But it's a good question. I can try to follow up with that, Tino.
Yeah, and apologies, not trying to put you on the spot, but I just wanted to make sure you guys were aware that that was a key consideration that, if folks are going to, for example, their Board of County Commissioners and saying, hey, this is on the horizon, we need to start looking at funding options that, that planning process and the ability of individual counties and municipalities to kind of bear that cost might not align with a typical 5-year,
Sure.
administrative order.
Yeah, and it did say in our response, that came from our Southwest District, it was through administrative orders, either at the time of renewal, or something else, but I think really it's theoretical right now because it's on a case-by-case basis, but.
Yeah, and I think Jan in the chat was confirming that, Tino, your question only applies if we were to pursue a path where we're stating a new numeric nutrient criteria, not if we pursued this alternative path. And I guess the kind of assurance that I'd be kind of curious about from the department's perspective, as well as from the perspective of the room, is, so we make no changes to the administrative, conditions, anything like that. Everybody's kind of whole in their permits. We continue to meet a hydrologically normalized load. We have challenges with an absolute load, and we continue to see recurring algae blooms and seagrass loss in that bay segment. Where does that put us on the path for resolving and providing some certainty to demonstrate reasonable assurance that we're going to attain the water quality standards that we've identified for Old Tampa Bay? To me, like, that's just the part of it that I would sort of want help understanding from the room, because it puts us in a very similar position to where we've been for the last 5-10 years. And I certainly understand everything that is attractive about this path. It's one that I have, been aware of, but I kind of want to know, it still keeps us in this sort of gray area of what do we do if the bay segment doesn't respond? How do we approach that? Stacy.
Well, I mean, I think we have some proposed actions. I guess we haven't presented the results of the TAC, where we had like a little workshop and people throw out a bunch of different ideas. I mean, I just stumbled upon it today a little before the meeting, and there were some really interesting suggestions in there, some other potentially contributing factors that maybe we should look at further. So I think we can still keep doing the good science and trying to figure out exactly what are the main things that we can try to affect that will improve the seagrass or the pyridinium or whatever, the prime issues are. So I don't think we're going to be stagnant. I think there's lots more to do, lots more to study, and hopefully the wastewater improvements, some of these new rules that will be coming should help as well.
I'm not sure how much of that, for the folks online, how much they heard, but I think that Stacy was expressing a commitment to stronger reporting for the action plan database on those projects that the partners are willing to pursue that either have a nitrogen load reduction or are helping us better understand the conditions that we're seeing in that bay segment. Would be my hope that that's a fair summary. Well, I appreciate your detailed responses to our letter and your willingness to come and, talk with the consortium participants today and share your perspectives and answer their questions. I'm sure that there's going to be some follow-up and clarifications that will be required before we submit the next reasonable assurance plan. Yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you, Maya. Thank you. I appreciate the attention of the group.
All right.
Okay, and next we'll hear from John Coates and Herb Donica on Piney Point allocation update.
John's going to go first.
So thank you, everybody. Hopefully you guys can hear me here and online. So first, this is gonna be a joint presentation. I want to go up and hopefully I have the easy job. I just go to set the stage and kind of talk about a couple of things from the department's perspective. And then gratefully pass the baton to Herb Donica, the court-appointed receiver for the Piney Point site and his experts who are here to talk through some of the topics and give some of the updates. And I also want to extend appreciation for Maya and Ed on behalf of the Tampa Bay Estuary Program, and to Tina, who has vacated the room, and Michelle on behalf of the Tampa Bay Nitrogen Management Consortium for giving us a chance to provide an update. And it has been a couple of years, and there's been a lot of things. Hopefully, if there's nothing else you take away from the few slides that I go through, it's been a lot of awfully good work that's been done, and there's a lot more that still needs to be done to finish things, and put this site in a long-term stable care position. So that's the goal. And so see if I can operate the apparatus here. So these are the kind of things I wanted to touch on at a very high level, and I will try to go fast and try not to really dive into some of the details on the slides, but just give you a sense of what I'm trying to convey. So I do want to go back and I want to talk about the history, because I think it's important to set the stage and how that ties into some of the ongoing activities today at the site. Want to touch a little bit very high level on site closure status, and then really Herb and his folks will be able to go through and give you, I think, a real on the ground sense for the kind of work that has happened and really, what's underway at the site today. I want to put in some perspective on sort of some ongoing challenges that I think, are overriding, for any site like this, particularly this site. And then again, thankfully, I'll pass the baton to Herb and his folks who will be here. Again, it's a joint presentation, and we'll all stay for questions and next steps. And I'm certain that everybody has used up all the questions they have today on the colleagues from Deere who are just here. So hopefully that would be good. So for site history, we have certainly presented this information before, but what I would ask folks to take away is, this site has a lot of history that affects, where it ended up with, in 2021 in particular, and in the current path that we're on. And it really was something that was founded in the vision of Manatee County. And so today, Manatee County is an excellent partner, and very, very thankful we have some Manatee County representatives here. The state certainly has an interest. This is all of our backyard. Tampa Bay is all of our backyard, and Manatee County has an interest in this. But the site itself was created in the foundation of the establishment of the Port of Manatee in northern Manatee County, established in the thinking and the vision of Manatee County of how they wanted to develop infrastructure for water and sewer, and how they wanted to grow the northern portion of Manatee County. And indeed, that included, getting Borden Chemical to site the phosphoric acid and fertilizer manufacturing facilities at that site, which began in 1965. And I know that everybody here was fully employed and gainfully working for good deeds in 1965. So it's just like yesterday. And the site went through a number of transitions, as things often happen, and ultimately, skipped through all that. And in 2001 was the first significant change where the Mulberry Corporation, it was a combination of bankruptcy from the Royster Phosphates folks. Mulberry Corporation filed for bankruptcy, and there's a lot of folks here who know the details more than I do, but ultimately there were two entities: the Mulberry Phosphates, which operated in Polk County, in Mulberry, and then the Piney Points Phosphates, which of course was the facility here in northern Manatee County. And that set the stage, and not here on the slide, but important to note, both EPA as well as DEP folks at the time stepped in and did things at the site to respond to Mulberry Corporation no longer being able to care for the site, or no longer willing to care for the site. They stepped in and made sure that, and to do everything that could be done to make sure the site was on a path for closure and restoration. During that time period, the bankruptcy trustee sold the site to an entity, HRK, who stayed at the site, worked with Port Manatee to provide storage. And in 2011, after the site had been essentially closed at that time with reservoirs that are really what we're talking about today, the reservoirs at this site, that project unfortunately had a compartment, the NGS South, that we'll talk about, and you'll see some pictures from the receiver's presentation. The NGS South had a failure. So very, very, very unfortunate. A lot of our concern and heartburn about that and what happened. And ultimately that set HRK and the site on a much different path than where it was at 2011. And so the reality is, I want to bring it forth, and again, I don't want to go through all this information. It's here, and we'll certainly answer questions if anybody has anything they want to talk about. But by March of 2021, The site had accumulated water and had a second failure in the NGS South. So it's a 70-acre reservoir that was built during closure from the circa 2001 Mulberry Corporation bankruptcy and abandonment of the site. So that compartment failed, and that compartment is the crux of a lot of the work that you're going to hear talking about, as well as other compartments at the site. And so I think in a very important step, the department stood back and said, okay, you know, everybody responded, Manatee County, the state, emergency folks. There's a lot of response, a lot of information about 2021 and the basically Easter time period of 2021. One of the best things that happened at the end of 2021 was getting the court-appointed receiver in place, which helped, I think, put a focus back on the needs at the site. And because of the changes and things that had evolved, to be able to provide funding to support the mandate that the court provided the receiver to go ahead and revisit and completely close the reservoirs essentially that are at the site, and make sure that in the future, Tampa Bay and the state and the communities here would never have to be worried about the Piney Point site and accumulation of water. So I want to bring this up because what that does, one thing that court appointment does is it allows the department to sort of step back from emergency response activities and get back in a role where hopefully, and several people here should snicker, hopefully, you know, where we're going to be better suited for our role as a regulatory oversight agency to set the big picture of what needs to be done to protect Tampa Bay, to implement some of the permitting requirements that you all have been talking about that make my head spin, and to also make sure that there's sufficient support and funding to the best we can. We're a governor's agency, and you know, we identify the needs and stuff, and we are very thankful that the site continues to receive funding and support to get the job done. So that is essential. So the receiver, really, there's only 2 bullets for the receiver, but that's everything else. So the receiver has to do all the day-to-day stuff, everything you can imagine, and we'll talk about a permit we issued. Everything that needs to be done at the site, the receiver and his experts are managing. So I'm going to take a minute and pause on something I didn't do. I do want to talk about the regulatory role, and the receiver will introduce his folks. I want to acknowledge Lance Counts is here, you know, in person today. So Lance is the administrator who oversees our phosphate programs today, you know, in the Tampa area. And we have other expertise and experience here in the room, and let Herb introduce those. So forgive me for that oversight. So on this slide here, I want to talk about just the very big picture. So the site itself has parts and pieces that have been sold off during various transactions where the entities in bankruptcy have parsed away some of the sites that were not part of the phosphogypsum stack system and the stormwater systems that serve it. Today, essentially what you see on the screen are the 4 compartments. They're called the new gyp stack north and south, so NGS in and NGS south, NGS there, and the old gyp stack north and south compartments. Those were the 4 main operational compartments that go back to the operation of this site as a phosphoric acid and fertilizer production facility, and the disposal of the calcium sulfate, the phosphogypsum, in this configuration here at the site. So those 4 reservoirs were closed in the initial efforts from 2001 as lined reservoirs, and is the NGS South, which is a 70+ acre. This has the watershed of that as being about 72 acres. That is the compartment that has had the 2 failures that have been extraordinarily problematic for the site. The important point here I want to think about is, so I said, hey, this site was created and established in the 60s. There's, you know, for the site that we focus on here, we consider the watershed to be 471 acres, but easily 160+ acres, 166 acres, I guess the number here, of this site since the mid-60s and its operations in the 70s have never drained to the surrounding community as that community grew up. So if you're going to close those areas, convert them from areas that have to be managed for different reasons for the wastewater in those compartments and turn them into non-contact stormwater areas, you have to account for the discharge and the drainage from all that new watershed. So essentially take a 300+ acre footprint and you add in 166 acres of new watershed. So clearly you have to set a high bar for protecting from flooding. So it's very critical because those areas that are downstreams of the site have not seen discharges from that additional basically 50%+ increase in watershed. And obviously, for the point here in the discussion today, you have to focus on the nitrogen loading that's going to be coming off the site and all the other water quality parameters that are important for this site. So I'm certainly not going to go through all this, but I want you to take a look. This will be in the slides, which I know will be available. And just, I'll hit on a few things. I've got 2 slides here, but this just sort of gives you an idea of all the activities and all the interwoven steps and processes and approvals that are necessary. So, in August of 2021, Court Appointed Receiver gets, is engaged at the site and is taking over the day-to-day operations, taking over the closure and the long-term care and the planning. And the site, even after the events of March and April 2021, still had over 500 million gallons of ponded water that would have to be managed, at that time. Of course, it's continued to rain. I will give you just some perspective. Jeff Barrett here in the audience reported to us, hey, the site's getting rain, getting at least another 2 inches. So think about that. As we were sitting here, that site's getting another couple inches of rain. 2 inches of rain is 8+ million gallons of water over that watershed. So, it isn't just a matter of what we had in 2021. It's the ongoing rainfall and stuff like that, the things that you have to plan for and be able to manage. So in here, you'll see there's a lot of milestones, and indeed, one of them is in 2022, Manatee County Board of Commissioners and the receiver reached an agreement to be able to use an underground injection control well that was being constructed by Manatee County, as well as the treatment system for that operation. That is a huge and insurmountable success. I don't know if insurmountable is maybe not the right word, but that's a huge component of what was necessary. You cannot close any kind of a site like this until you can sort of get the water out of the way in very simple terms. And so it is essential, and you'll see that ability to remove water over time is the only thing that has allowed the receiver to be able to proceed as quickly as possible to get closure done. There are various milestones in here. You'll see that the OGS South was the first compartment that the receiver undertook. Those plans were essentially fully baked and approved by the department in 2022, mid-2022, but by September 2023, that first 24 or something like that acres for the OGS South was closed. And that was the first area, because that was the one compartment that through the history at the site had not had processed water from the remnant fertilizer manufacturing operations in it. So the site was able to prepare that area because it didn't have to wait on processed water treatment and removal. It just had seawater that had to be decanted back from the 2011 dredging project with Port Manatee. Again, another screen here. Please just understand there's a lot of things. There's a lot of detail here. Ultimately, the receiver is going to talk about kind of where they are at the site. So they have gone through, and for example, they talk about the compartment. You'll see some pictures of the NGS South. So that area had a lot of fines, 7 to 8 feet deep in a 70+ acre lined compartment of materials that needed to be removed to be able to close that area. And you have to figure out a way to dewater that material. So you'll see some pictures on the successes there. And that work was completed earlier this year in February of 2025. And since that time, you'll see some pictures of additional work where they are going through and preparing that area to go through closure itself. And you'll see pretty quickly that almost everywhere that's left has to be engaged in closure activities over the next year and a half, approximately. So the allocation for this site, which is really, I think, part of what we want to talk about and be open for any questions on. So I mentioned it, well, certainly in the timeline, I don't know if I mentioned it, but the department issued a renewed wastewater NPDES permit for the facility. So that permit has a final water quality based effluent limit of 0.9, and it's an absolute in the current terms I heard today. It's a not hydrologically normalized allocation. So the final permit reflects a total nitrogen load from the site of 0.9 tons per year, not hydraulically normalized, so an absolute limit. And that was, flagged way back in 2010. So again, a little bit in the Wayback Machine. In 2010 was flagged at that time as an interim allocation. I suspect, but there's probably other folks here who are closer to the discussions, in some way recognizing that the site at that time was still undergoing closure. And, there was probably going to be a need to revisit things at some point in time to see what that site would do. Ultimately, picture the site should be just a grassy area with non-contact stormwater. That's the only thing that should run off this site. So we have an allocation of 0.9 tons per year. It's relevant to myself to two, I think, of the segments, so the expanded Lower Tampa Bay, that is, the discharge is actually directly, I think, primarily to the Lower Tampa Bay, but the expanded Lower Tampa Bay and Tampa Bay together have 210 and 28 tons per year of allocations. And you'd have to look through each one. Most of those, I believe, are hydrologically normal.
Those allocations are just to.
Right. Yeah, and right, these are the allocations, right, that the agency relies on to be able to determine what is the water quality based effluent that's necessary and permitting to be able to meet the reasonable assurance plan. And I will let anybody in here refine that message if I didn't get it well said. So, and so all of this work that's ongoing and the need to get this done, because until the watersheds are closed, it will still continue to accumulate rainwater mixed into the processed watershed, and that contact water has to be treated as processed water. So that 8 million gallons that we talked about that just rained today, that's a mixture of rainwater and processed water in contact areas that will have to be managed. The rainfall of the last 3 years, you can see nobody here experiences a normal rainfall. Average rainfall is absolutely a real average, but none of us gets to enjoy it, I'd say. And particularly the 23 and 24 years, that site was very dry in the 23 calendar year and very wet with Milton and other events in 2024. So, every area, square foot of grassed area at the site is going to have to be able to, regardless of the rainfall, meet the final water quality based effluent that's going to apply to this site. So to kind of talk just for a minute at the site today, if you all hopefully online can see my mouse moving, I've got the small pointer. This is the OGS South. You'll see pictures where this is closed. So that's been completed. This is the area where one of the most significant risky endeavors, I think, that turned out very successful, the dredging operation that was done in this 70+ acre compartment to remove that 8 or 9 foot of fines that were in that compartment as a result of the Port Manatee dredging project, and be able to dewater that. So no matter where it is at the site, so that material can handle construction of essentially a new cap and a closure, and then be converted to a non-contact, properly functioning stormwater system. So you'll see pictures of that area. So you've got this area in work. The equipment and the mobilization, you'll see, I was talking just a minute at the site, and it was on the chart. For this area here, we call this the OGS North Tube area. That area is indeed, essentially starting its closure now. The plans are issued, business specs, contracts issued, contractor is completing his mobilization, and hopefully by maybe Friday, maybe by early next week, we'll actually begin working in earnest on this area. There's ongoing work here that the receiver will talk about, and this area here has in some places 5 layers deep of essentially geotube membranes, geotubes that are holding the dewatered materials that were dredged out of this compartment to be able to provide a stable closure footprint for the OGS North compartment. So all of these areas are going to be under and in process over the next, throughout the end of 26. So we've got, less than a year and a half. The stormwater modeling at the site, I think, has been one of the most critical things that had to be done, both to figure out the flooding aspect and also the permit has an interim limit of 4.5 tons per year. I mentioned that the final limit is 0.9 tons per year. That was in recognition of some of the data and stuff. The receiver will talk a little bit more about the data and from the site. But the important thing to know is that folks are going through and evaluating to determine more concretely, what will this site do and how well will it perform with the closure work that's being done over time. And if you step back at some level, again, it is going to be a closed facility with grassed, vegetated areas and proper stormwater management. That's the ultimate simple goal. So some quick other challenges here. If you take all those first 4 or 5 bullets, it basically says all of these areas are in some form of active work. So this is a very, very busy place. It's going to be busier. There also is a long punch list of items that come from, I said, how critical that modeling is. The site looked at both the 25-year design event, of course, for permitting purposes, and they also looked at the 100-year, based on questions from the department, 100-year event for a number of reasons, but also to go back and reevaluate some of the past closure work in areas and do any upgrades necessary. So like any good construction project, like everybody who's ever built or home or anything like that, they're already working on a punch list of things that have to be done before folks can say, we have completed the task at hand to close this site. There are other items in here that are absolutely essential. Folks are continuing to work on groundwater quality assessment, at this site to make sure that this ultimate closure and the final, any additional work that gets done in this effort are protecting groundwater at and surrounding this site. So that's an essential part of our permitting. And so that work is also underway. That includes evaluating and revisiting this entire site as extensive underground drainage systems that protect the sites outside the site essentially from the seepage and make sure that the seepage and the poor water that was in this waste disposal facility are being captured. And so all the systems and perimeters of this site and all throughout here have drain systems that are being reevaluated to make sure they're performing right, make sure we have the right operational controls on those, and to determine whether or not any additional drains need to be added. So that's certainly important. And the permit has a series of things that do have to be done. And ultimately, we would expect the receiver and the engineer to come back to the department and report to us anything else that needs to be done to take care of this site. That's what that last bullet means. And that's the essence of it. I haven't gone through nearly as quick as I wanted. Absolutely. I think I can.
I believe it.
This one?
Yeah, this one. So my question is sort of an operational one. We're starting to gear up to put together the next reasonable assurance plan update for the department. And the number that you have there listed as the interim loading based on the new permit that has been issued is different from the allocation that's listed in the existing RAP. And so I'm wondering how we're gonna resolve that, how we ought to be reporting on that, if that's been offset with the trade somewhere that hasn't been reported yet, or if that's something that the Department of the Receiver is working on, or if you could just talk a little bit about that.
So no, the trade has not yet happened, but the back of the car is open.
Okay.
So I think that's something that's to be determined in all seriousness. So and I think that you'll see some data and some information that the site at the time that 4.5 tons per year was set was based on the best available data that we had at the time, and the expertise at the site and the contractor who's working on it with the receiver have gone back in and spent some time, all the expertise at the site. And I think we won, and I was probably consistent with what Janicki and Ray Pribble and folks would report, that that may not be needed, but there was a recognition of, you had basically in simple math, you had approximately 300 or 205 acres. They say approximately 300 acres of watershed that had been running, offsite. Looked at the loading of that and recognized that even if we can't get it to perform better, that the site ultimately is going to increase by 50+% the drainage. And so that is just an interim number. I think that should not drive any discussion about what may be needed or how the site needs to be managed in the future. What will, though, is the results of that stormwater quality plan that's required on the permit. And I think once that information is there, then I think everybody in the community and the department and the receiver will have sufficient information to sit down and figure out, how should this site be treated? What do we do with that interim allocation that was put out back in 2010?
Agree that it's probably a more realistic portrayal of what the load to manage the site appropriately is. My question's like a pretty simple one of, I would rather talk to y'all about it now rather than be in the position of having to list an interim permitted load that is that much greater than the load that's allocated to them.
Yeah, very understandable.
So I don't want to put in a position, I want to make sure that there's plenty of time to work through.
Right.
Because as we all know, this base segment is 100% allocated, and so to have more than that 0.6, 0.9, right?
Right. So, I mean, and that is why I think even when we were going to, move forward with the permit itself, we reached out. I think that's why indeed we envisioned that this update today would be important. But I think that conversation has to be driven by the data from that plan. And so what I would say is let's get a little bit more information. We'll get through the receiver's presentation. And as a follow-up, I think we should think about how soon, with the data that's being generated, does it make sense to sit down and try to figure out how will everybody be able to address this? We can't move it. It's going to be in Manatee County. We can't fix that. We can't change the location of the site. It is I think the closure, you'll see some information on the closure designs. They are doing, everything possible that can be done in the closure design for these new cap areas. Essentially, they're going to be in these different compartments to be able to address, and making sure there's nothing, basically no suspended solids being transported off of those new areas. And so I think that's going to improve the water quality. And indeed, I think making sure that everybody agrees about the historical information for the last, say, 5 years and 5 years before, that information, along with our analysis, that everybody agrees that everybody's got an accurate understanding of the performance of the site, is really going to be essential to be able to have that conversation.
Wholeheartedly agree, and just want to make sure we have consensus about how to treat it in the report that we submit for the consortium to the department. So
Yeah, right now it seems to be like a timing issue. If
You're working on the 27 update.
Yeah, we delivered that to the department by December 31st, 2027, the latest.
Right.
So it'd be a matter of whether or not this information is at hand to make an informed decision of changing the allocation of the Pine Point facility at that time.
Yeah, I think so that the schedule and the permitting and everything is difficult to meet, the ambitious timelines that were set forth by the permitting. But, the goal there was to be able to get to that information well ahead of 2027. So we recognize, I think the department recognizes, and I think that Ken and Kevin and everybody there would also, they want to make sure that we all can get on the same page and understanding how this area is going to perform with these new closures. Okay. Herb, my apologies on the usage of time. All right.
Well, thank you.
Sure. You answered my big one. I'm sorry for having to ask the hard question. I hope this works okay in Google Slides.
Thank you. Thank you, Maya and Ed. I'm thrilled to be back before you again to give you an update. I'm very pleased that I can report the progress we made over the last couple of years. It's important that we continue the momentum. So I'm going to try to give you a short update. I know that Mr. Coase covered a lot of it. I appreciate that. It'll enable me to speed up a little bit. Okay. I should have introduced myself. I'm Herb Donica. I am the court-appointed receiver for the Piney Point site. Hey, yes, works great. Thank you. So my role as receiver has two separate paths, have you? The first one is that I am primarily responsible for all day-to-day operations on the site. That'd be the ordinary day-to-day maintenance of the grounds. We have a staff of 11 people at the site. We staff it 24/7. We take care of all the landscaping. We do the water sampling. We maintain the roads, the ditches, other routine parts of just owning the site. Now,
thank goodness I do not own the site. The court, the Manatee Circuit Court has vested me with all the powers I need to repair the site, to do work on the site. And I control all aspects within the physical boundaries. So it's just like I own it, but I don't have to pay the taxes, nor do I have to sell anything. So it's pretty cushy. The second function is stack closure, which is the big part. I am funded by the state of Florida. The legislature has done a set aside, I believe, a little over $200 million for us to complete stack closure. I work closely with my appointed engineers, Ardeman Associates. I'm joined today by Mr. Fong Vo, who a lot of people think we're now related because we spend a lot of time together. So, but Ardeman assists me in developing the conceptual closure plan that the department approved. We do the interim construction plans that they review and approve. And they also provide some consultation, which is very valuable to us. The funding is administered by the department. I don't, the governor didn't send me a check for 200 million. That would have been great. But instead, I keep track of all the expenditures. I submit reports to the department, show them where the money's going, show them the contracts that I sign to have the work done. The department reviews that. They replenish my coffers and I can carry on. So it's a good oversight. Everything's done under review. Everything's done under the auspices of the Manatee Circuit Court. So the site closure is broken down into several separate projects, all geared towards the final closure. A lot of that requires us to recontour the stack system. This is the stack system as it existed I think before we got started on the closure of the old Gyp Stack South, which was our first pond that we closed. All of these ponds were holding water, around 400 million gallons. You can't get in there and recontour that pond with all that water. You got to bring it out. And that's where the deep injection well comes into play. The secret sauce, have you, the deep injection well, is that is the only way we can get ahead of the annual Florida rainfall. We have employed other technology, other efforts to reduce the water within the stack system, but we never would have gotten it out without the use of the deep injection well. So that was the most important part of enabling us to get the construction started. We got the ponds emptied. So far, we have disposed of over 500 million gallons. Now that's out of 400 million gallons over there. You got to remember that we are still getting rainfall. So whatever we have to get rid of in the ponds includes the annual rainfall. Before, we never would have stayed ahead of it. The best we could do was tread water, have you. So it's the deep injection well was key to that success. I'm just going to flip through. This is our stormwater management program. Mr. Vo may go into that more than I would, but as Mr. Coates reported, when you close these ponds, that water is going to go to the west side. We are increasing the hydraulic burden on the west side. So we have to have a way of managing that water. This graph will show that if we have a 25-year rainfall, that water is diverted in different areas solely to slow it down. If we have a 25-year rainfall in a day, this area will take 104 hours to drain. And that way we can protect the two roads. Down on the south end is Buckeye Road. On the west side is US Highway 41. If we didn't control that water coming off of the system, we would probably destroy one or both of those roads at the outfalls. All of the water will be routed through two outfalls. Outfall 3 here, and then at the corner of Buckeye Road to 41. The water is going to meander through all this area here into our west basin here, and eventually through one or both outfalls, it goes along this ditch along Buckeye Road, under Highway 41, and then out to the bay. Now that's stormwater, so it'll be hitting the grass. After we finish closing each stack system, be 2 feet of topsoil, then vegetation, grass. So it's the same water that hits your driveway at home. It's going to be as clean as it is. It's not any processed water. We have a separate drainage system underneath the liner that will route the seepage, the wastewater seepage, the pore water, to an area. I believe it's going to be this pond here. That's a holding pond. We have a pumping system here. The water is filtered to get the heavy particulate out of it. Then it'll go underneath Buckeye Road to the Manatee County's deep injection well here. So that water is separated. So it's not going to be addressed in the bay. It's going to go down the deep injection well. This slide shows the deep injection well. That's not on the Piney Point property. This is across the street, south of Buckeye Road on county property. The county owns the well. Is a joint effort. We built a water treatment facility next to the well to take out nutrients, the phosphorus, nitrogen, and anything else that's in there. And that's after we filter the water. This slide shows where the sediment in the NGSS is diverted through the dredge program into geotubes into two areas. The first set of geotubes were placed in the south end of the old gypstack north. We have about 30 geotubes there. They are stacked 2 and 3 high. Those tubes are anywhere from 100 to 200 feet long, 90 feet in circumference. So they hold a lot of material. Just before the slurry from the dredge program is injected into the tubes, we introduce a polymer, and that was very tricky. We had to do a lot of experimentation with the polymer. In fact, halfway through the program, we actually changed the polymer constituency that worked a little bit better, but the polymer latches onto the slurry. And you can see here that it coagulates so it stays within the geotubes. If we just routed the water into the geotubes, it'd come back out. It wouldn't, nothing would be accomplished. The same slurry would come out that went in. As it is, we have, this is a geotube here. You see the water streaming out. It's clear. It was muddy going in, and now all that sediment is captured within the geotube. In the new gyp stack north, which was drained, we have, I think, about 330 geotubes stacked 4 and 5 high. We would pump the geotubes with the slurry. Over time, they would settle. After they settled to a certain amount, we put another layer on so we could use the space available to keep the geotubes in one place. So 330 some geotubes here, 30 geotubes here. All that will be entombed. Eventually have 2 feet of topsoil, will be a liner, then 2 feet of topsoil, and then grass. Huh? All right, okay. This slide illustrates the problem we had that's novel. This is the new gyp stack south. This area here is anywhere from 3 feet to 8 feet of sediment. It is very unique sediment. It's not from phosphate processing. This is sediment that came over from the bay when the Port Authority needed to enlarge berth 12. So they had a dredge program in the bay that pumped all the slurry. I must be hitting the wrong button. Sorry about that.
Hit escape on the keyboard.
Oh, there we go. All right. Very good. Okay. So this is 8 feet or around
Good, keep talking.
700,000 cubic yards of sediment. We had the dredges come in. There's any one time we may have had 2 dredges working. A large part of the time, they worked 24 hours. They had crews, three shifts of crews. The tricky part is this red line here is the liner. So our conditions under the bid procurement for the dredging program was that the dredges had to get 600,000 cubic yards out of 700,000 by staying 1 foot off the liner. They cannot damage that liner. We'd have to repair it, and it's a very tricky thing when you go underwater, which we've done a couple times, but it's very expensive and very difficult. So the dredge program was awarded to C&M Dredging out of Leesburg. They outfitted the dredge with certain protections like rubber tires on the cutter head. I'm not supposed to say cutter head actually, but the suction unit, and they stayed 1 foot off, and they got the 600,000 cubic yards. The last 100,000 cubic yard, which has been, drying out because we emptied all the water out of here. The last 100,000 cubic yards, which is now about 65,000 cubic yards, will be pulled out of the new gyp stack south and used to cover the tubes in the new gyp stack north. That's to even out the tubes because they have crevices where the tubes are next to each other. So this way we can use that sediment and keep it on site. But it was a successful program. They did it on time. I believe we brought it in about $1.5 million below budget. So it was a big success for us. And we didn't know if it worked, because again, this is very unique material. It's not phosphate processing. It was unknown, and it's pretty strange. Actually, the constituency of the material and the components change from here to here. And we had to change the polymer dosage as we went south in the pond. So it was a challenge that required daily meetings and daily analysis of the data. We'll have to learn how to do this. All right, so there's a sediment after, it starts off as fine, almost dust that's suspended in the water, and it will harden up as it dries after the polymer is applied to it. So here we have over 300 geotubes stacked 4 and 5 high. This is an illustration of them rolling out a geotube on a second or third level there. Use this big machine, looks like out of a science fiction movie or something. Here you can see the water coming out. On this slide, we have the pipes from the dredge unit are pumped into the geotubes. So as the geotube will fill up 3 or 4 feet, they'll move to another geotube, let this one settle, come back to it later and fill it up. This is the bottom of New Gypstack South. All we have is that 1 foot of sediment left. And we've had a contractor come in there and sort of do piles or windrows to promote the drainage. As it dries out, it'll be a lot easier to handle. Right now, it's kind of a bear because it's wet, it's mucky, it's like glue. It's very difficult to handle, but as we dry it out, and it'll dry out better on this north end because it's higher ground, the water flows this way. At this end, we have a sump where we're drawing water out as we get drainage from all these areas here. So we pull water out of the New Gypstack South, again, going over to the deep injection well. Okay. This slide shows a simplified version of the stormwater management. The arrows show how the water will eventually flow. Outfall 3 and outfall 1 are the ones we'll be using to deliver the water to the bay. But the water, as you can see, will go. Here's the water going away from the outfall, all the way around. That's the delay tactic that we have to use to slow the water down to allow for proper drainage without causing damage to Highway 41 or Buckeye Road here. This is a graph that'll show the differences in water management. Here we've closed Old Gypstack South. So that's 34 acres that are now added to the watershed because that pond no longer retains water. That water is delivered to the stormwater management program. Here we have 305 acres that's currently draining to outfalls 1 and 3. These 3 ponds will eventually join this area here. That's the plan over time that will bring this last 142 acres into the stormwater management program. Yeah. You want to take? Okay. Mr. Fong, Mr. Vo will take over and give you some of the technical aspects of our nitrogen loading issues.
Thank you, Ho. Pretty much capture most of the slide we put together here. So I'm going to touch base just a couple of items. That's where I lost my hair when I started joining Pineapple team since 2021. I used to work on the same side with Tino when I joined Audubon 2018 and involved with Pineapple since 2021. But the first challenge was when we first involved Audubon we engaged with Piney Point. The first marching order for Mr. Coates was the hydrology. That's the first thing. He said, well, you're going to add 54 acres of watershed, 54% of acres of watershed into the current basin that already flow into those outfall. You don't want to make any impact hydrologically to the downstream property. Well, how are you going to do that? How are you going to add 54% of watershed into the current watershed, causing any hydraulic impact to it? That was the first challenge. So we're scratching our head. We could do all the mousetrap, how we design. The term that Maya, and we talked with her, we just walked in ACU, what did you use that term? Attenuation curve. That's exactly what we did. So you have to find a way to slow down that rainfall that you dump into the same area. When you design a pond, you have to allow it to release slowly. Eventually, the total volume will flow through there, but the peak flow will not increase. You don't flood Highway 41, right? So you have caused that was the first marching order that we had to comply with. So we spent 6-7 months to go through all type of design and simulation so we can meet that criteria. So that's what we did. So that's the part that Mr. Donica show you. So I can go back there pretty quick to show you where that is. You see that, Maya? That's the called attenuation curve. So with the condition before you touch the 154-acre watershed, what it look like? Well, you done more to it. You have to maintain the same. So that's a challenge. And we met that challenge. Accordingly, that's where the closure plan was approved. Okay. So that's the first challenge. The second challenge, that was in fact, the first one was the deep well injection, and Herb and John got that done. But the second challenge in my mind was this. Who would expect underneath that pond? You have 8-feet layer of mud underneath that bottle of water. Nobody expected that. You dredge the material, you put from the bay, material settle on the high point and flow down the water, you pump back. That's the location where they pump the seawater back to the ocean. Who would expect you have 800,000 cubic yards of that fine 700,000 underneath that water? Until Mr. Donica hired somebody to go out there and measure, he wondered how much water I have in that pond. He was not intended to find out how much mud. And the result come back and said, by the way, you have this amount of water, but you have 700,000 cubic yards of fine mud sitting on the bottom of that pond. Well, how are you going to close that? That's where I lost another set of hair. Okay, so how are you going to turn that? How are you going to turn that bucket of mud into solid? And why we have to do that? Why we can just leave it there and call it closed? No, this material here from the ocean water, high conductivity. You cannot have rainwater in contact with this material and discharge to the stormwater outfall, right? So the minute you put this dredge material into this gypsum tax system, you set a trap for yourself. Now you have to resolve it. So you have to turn this liquid into a solid block of material. So you can entomb into the liner system, because every drop of rain on this solid block cannot report back to the bay. Even that's where that came from. Because technically you cannot discharge high conductivity water back into the ocean. even where that material come from the ocean. So that was the challenge. The closure of Pine Pond today, I would say 90% involving entombing that trash material. The line we put in today is doing that, do that separation. So that was there was lots of seconds set ahead. We came up with a mousetrap. We don't have 4 or 5 years to get this done. Mr. Coach said you need to get it done within this number of years. That before we realized we have that mud sitting at the bottom there. So we came up, we did the research for a year and a half. We come up with an approach, use a polymer, do the dredging system, agglomerate this material. The minute you drop the chemical in there, they cleanse in together. They become like a cotton ball. Then that's where you put them into the tube. They release water. The water expel come out of the tube, and the solid stay behind. And when it stays behind, it consolidates. And over a couple of months, it turns into a solid block. So now you can put liner on top. You can walk on it. You can walk on it today. You can hear the crush inside the tube. And we did that within a year. And the budget is basically just, like Herb said, we beat the budget by $1.5 million under the budget and timely. So that's the second headache that we resolved. So today, that's what we got. If we move into right now, how we gonna get rid of that last 1 foot? Like I said, the reason we have to leave that 1 foot in there, just the insurance policy, so you don't punt through that liner. Because if you punt that liner, when the dredge operation is still there, he sit on top of 200 million gallon of water. The minute you punt that liner, where that dredge sunk the head down 15 feet, if he happened to miss the button, he punts a hole to that liner, you will create 2021 spill over all over again. So that's why that was critical. You can dredge it, but you cannot touch that liner. All the dredging companies from the US that came to bid on this project, more than half of them turned away. They're shaking their head. They said they don't have a liability enough to cover that damage to that liner. Because the minute they damage that liner, you guess what? Newspaper will go all over the town. Then we will start 2021 event over again. So that was a critical. So now we go on today, next couple of weeks to get this material out. We've been working this in May. So that basically captures all the headache that I went through. We have another set of presentation, about 2 more slides. We asked Gary, Mr. Ubler to join us because that's what you want to hear about the nitrogen load. So he's going to cover that. So Gary, are you here?
Can you hear me, Paul?
Okay, Gary, if you can speak closer to the mic so we can hear you. So Gary, you're going to talk about the nitrogen load relating to Piney Point.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, good afternoon. We are working with the department and the receiver with respect to the industrial wastewater NPDES permit. And as a condition of that permit, which I'll explain in a moment, we are looking at nitrogen loading as it is currently estimated and projecting what it will look like as the site closes. This first slide relates to a previous estimate that we had provided where the 2017 through 2021 5-year rolling average of load as measured in the discharges through the outfalls and the compliance monitoring under the prior approval was estimated at 2.77 tons per year. QC work done earlier, literally this month, revealed a discrepancy there in that the 2.77 tons was actual total loading of both nitrogen and phosphorus. So we have corrected that. And on the right side of this slide, you see that the 5-year rolling average from 2017 through 2021 was actually 1.39 tons per year. We calculated that we calculated a per acre contribution based on the fact that 305 acres of rainfall and runoff was generating 1.39 tons per year. Do the math, and that calculates to 9.11 pounds per acre per year. We then extrapolated that based on the slides that you saw previously, where the watershed will increase to 471 acres from 305 during the 2017 through 2021 period. And as you can see at the bottom of the right side of the slide, without any changes, just due to the watershed increase, the total post-closure projection is 2.15 tons per year. That is based solely on rainfall. So in a year like 2023, where we only received 32 inches of rain, the site would come in way underneath that. You know, if we were to hit another year or a string of years above annual average of 54, that number obviously would go higher. Go on to the next slide. So within the administrative order that accompanies the NPDES permit renewal was a requirement for a stormwater quality plan, which is underway. It called first for a plan of study to be submitted to the department. The department commented, we made a few modifications, and the plan of study was approved this past June. The implementation is underway. We will be looking at refining the rough estimate or the interim projection with a milestone no later than September of next year. And the administrative order requires a stormwater actions report as the final deliverable, which we project will occur no later than May 2027. And the scope of the work is to look at the loading changes due to the closure, evaluate technologies to reduce the loads, which would, as I said earlier, be driven by rainfall. So we have to focus on concentrations. We can't focus on volumes. And project whether the interim 0.9 ton per year TN allocation established in 2010 can be met. Also look at the numeric nutrient criteria, especially for total phosphorus. Provide recommendations regarding compliance with both the TN load allocation as well as the TP nutrient criteria, and describe modifications to the facility and or the permit that would be required to provide reasonable assurance the TN load and nutrient criteria will be met. And as I said, that work is ongoing. We're shooting to beat those milestone deadlines established at the top of the slide, and we'll report back as we learn more.
All right, thank you, Gary. When Gary talked about technology, I neglect to emphasize one more point, so I can go back to this slide to show you. John touched on that a little bit about how you retard the water, how you slow it down, but also looking for something else that you can improve the water quality. So each of the basin that we design for closure will have a feature we call stormwater detention with filtration system. If you live around your neighborhood, some of your area, you have a detention pond in your neighborhood, right? So those detention ponds are basically to retain or treat first 1 inch of rainfall in the neighborhood. Well, the concept here is you do have the retention also here, but we put in the system we call the filtration system, a sand filter system. So the first couple of inches of rain will not pour into that pipe outfall right away. It's gradually filtered to that sand layer. And which you improve the bacteria, you improve the water quality. I'm not sure about reducing the nitrogen, but the water quality will improve. So that's a feature that John referring to, is you incorporate this type of technology into the closure design. So I would just point that out. So when we finish closing, you look to each of those ponds from aerial photograph, you see that white feature around each of those inlet structure. That's what that's for. And that is something that we incorporate into the closure design. Yeah. And the grass, just another important thing, the grass that we grass here, Mr. Jeff Barry, he's very aware of it, is we keep emphasizing, you had to put the common Bermuda grass in this area. Why is it? In your yard, you call it weed. But here, that's a good commodity to have because it's sustained the drought very well, right? So you don't have to fertilize them. In your yard, you fertilize 2-3 times a year, but here you don't do that. The most you do is you put it in there. The most is within a year you do fertilizer 1 or 2 times, that's it. It will take care by itself, even you have a drought. So that's the reason all the grass in the gypsum tile closure today, at Pine Point, you will see common Bermuda grass and help you a lot that you have dump fertilizer into all this area years after years. That's all I have. Okay, so Gary, you stick around. Do you have any question? If they have any question?
Sure, I'm here.
All right, thank you. That's it. Yeah.
Questions?
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
So for the interim limit, what's the effective time period for that? Is there like an explanation? That's under a consent order, right?
Yeah, it's under a
Oh, okay.
permit.
So it's through the 5-year,
Right, and I think the thing that the important in my head.
Yeah.
What about the timing?
yeah.
So, August, September and 26, hopefully there's gonna have a much better projection of the number. Talk to us about what time is needed, but that certainly gives some run, the expectation gives some runway. Or discussions to see what needs to happen at the site. So there's the effort up front, do what you can. I think Fong is absolutely right. I mean, so nitrogen obviously is very hard to remove in stormwater systems. But you'll certainly get other benefits like phosphorus, obviously will be up there. And there'll be some, I think, improvements with nitrogen, particularly being trapped and stuff like that. So it's certainly an improvement. And it's just part of the effort to do what can be done at the site. But ultimately, these are grassed areas that will be isolated. And so there's only so much that can be done in a site that needs to be stable, long-term care and function just like anybody's non-fertilized factor. So there's a lot perhaps to unpack there. But the condition itself is a requirement that they develop and evaluate and see what else can be done at the site, figure out how to make sure that this site fits into the requirement that everybody comply, with the renewable insurance allocations and whatever happens.
So,
Yeah, and excuse me, and 2 feet below this grass, that's all natural soil. And you have a high density liner to separate from that natural soil with the dredge sediment. So the rainfall will never get in touch with the dredge sediment on the bottom. So that's why earlier I say entomb, basically separated by the high density polyethylene liner. So
have we had that situation before, having an interim allocation in place? How's that been handled in the past? Has
So
that
the
happened?
site currently has an interim allocation 0.9 tons.
Yeah, but
But then
the order is allowing them 4. Have we had that before?
Not different than what's in the reasonable terms.
Okay.
But there's been interim allocations that allocations were finalized subsequently from 2010 in the successive RA updates.
Yeah.
Been entities that had placeholder interim allocations and then they became.
Fine.
Remember, this is basically a compliance schedule, right? So
Yeah.
maybe thankfully, as more work was being done on the study and looking at the data,
the 4.5, is hopefully not something we'll never be seen. Maybe it's gonna be 2.5 as the interim. But I think we have to wait and see. That number that Mr. Uhlauer showed was just a projection of existing water quality data, so many pounds per acre of nitrogen off those watersheds, extrapolated out. That's how the 4.5 was derived too, based on the data, before some additional information was realized. But the goal is also to see, as you add in that 166 acres, 24 is in place. As you complete that another 140 something acres, how will those areas perform relative to the rest of the site? I welcome if we are compiling that data for everybody to take a look at the information and realize what can be done. And ultimately, it has to fit. So it is a schedule. Final effluent limit is 0.9.
That's what I'm trying to kind of like visualize, like what Maya brought up, how we're going to report this when you're allocating more than what it's allowed.
On
So.
a compliance schedule basis.
Okay.
Yeah, we're gonna have new loading information for the 2022 to 2026 period. We're gonna first look at base segment. Do provide information at a finer scale, each entities. There would be like scrutiny of the department and whether or not those interim allocations come into play.
What loading are you reporting right now?
So I think it's consistent with the numbers.
Well, that was through 2027. I'm curious. No, that was through 2021. I was curious, like this recent yet data.
When we went back and looked at the numbers, I don't remember what it was off the top of my head, but it's close to the 1. It's not 4.5, it's below 1.5. But there's other facilities that have interim limits as part of, maybe not AOs, but as part of incentives that are discharging Tampa Bay with their limits for interim granted above what was allocated initially to achieve the.
Okay, so we have had that before?
That I've seen in our report.
I'm not going to point fingers at. I just know that it's a thing that has existed. Pretty much can't let a facility permanently run non-compliance without under some sort of.
Yeah, I understand that there's been AOs and COs for those entities that might be seen.
Maybe to answer one, so the data, now that I'm saying, the data past that 5-year period is at or below the previous trends.
Okay.
So there's very good prognosis, but we really need to get all the data in.
Yeah, to get the final number.
But in a format where people can have it readily available, look at it. So Janicki is still doing, I think, support work?
Yeah, it's ESA.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So whoever would be the right entity, get that information so people can understand it, look at it with us.
Yeah, so Ray's right now working on finalizing the first couple of years of this updated RA set period, so we can get an idea of where the loadings actually were, so you can kind of report on that. That'll probably be, once those data are available, that'll probably be a focus of an upcoming meeting with this group, so you can kind of get that check-in point before we get too close to the end of the period. Yeah.
When do you think you might do that? Is that all mid 2026, spring of 26?
I'm hoping it's much sooner than that, because Ray's been promising me the data here for a minute.
Yeah, we'll have looks like we'll have the first 3 years where wanted to get it done by now, but not quite.
Sure.
Just a comment, I think you touched on it, Ed. So the first hurdle is base segment compliance. It's good. All of our metrics are good. Then what you're talking about in the RA update or in the 5-year report is basically just a narrative discussion that they're operating under an order of department with an load limit. And that, there's some information there that shows they are trending towards their actual allocation over some time frame, right? But I think what I'm hearing is that you think it's gonna be about 1.2 tons per year, they have 0.9. I guess my question is, how do we close that gap? Are they gonna be looking for that from some other entity in a trade, or kind of what is the department's thoughts on that last piece?
So I think the only way to answer that is we had to set that out in the order itself.
Yep.
And the first responsibility is to look at the facility, see what can be done at the facility to reduce loading, since it does have the interim allocation of 0.9 tons. And then, once we know what can be done at the site practically and then get what other options there are. And it may be that it comes down to, if it needs to go from, say, hypothetically 0.9 to, 1.2, choose that number. Then, then we would have to look, and the site would then have to have a conversation and see what allocations are available. Because ultimately you can't over allocate. It's got to fit within what's necessary. And so, that dynamic, I think, has to come, and it would be in everybody's, I'm sure, best interest to figure out how to do that. But before we had that conversation.
You don't want to trade up for 4 if you only need 1 point.
Right.
I understand.
That would be fine. Not joyful.
Understood.
So I think it's really important, and I'm hoping that our timeframes that are gonna be achievable, must be achieved for the site, are going to plug in well with this body's discussions. That is ultimately the goal.
And I appreciate the additional level of clarity and detail that you were offering, Tino. Make sure that like the consortium has consensus that like if the timing doesn't get us all the way there, that even if what we report in this update is sort of like a narrative explanation of the process and what the site's working towards, we can still say, hopefully this base segment is on track. The entity table might show something different and unfavorable for this particular entity, but we've got the standards and conversation. So exactly. Yeah, so as long as everybody's kind of like comfortable with these steps, like that level of guidance is sort of what I'm looking for, because I don't want to call anybody out, right, in the thing. So we want to make sure that it's meeting everybody's needs.
Like I mentioned, I think it's mainly gonna be a timing thing when this information comes to bear around September of next year. As we're developing and finalizing the 2027 RIFA, we have about a year there. And think about whether or not a final allocation or some sort of long-term allocation for the facility could be recommended at that point. And then from there, it's a question of how transferring, if there's a need for additional allocation, facility would take place with other entities in that.
Yep. I think, Tom, if you can go to the next slide, I think the hope is that I'll say August, September, not that I'm going to sell our deadline, but that time frame of post-closure load projections, September 2026, will hopefully plug in well with some objective information to inform that discussion.
That timeline really helps. Thank you.
Yeah. I knew it was in the slides.
I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Fawn.
Yep.
I'm gonna ask one tough question, and it's not directed at anyone in particular, but we recognize sort of the expense that the state's bearing in terms of this closure. Is there any progress with the former owner in terms of resolving responsibility or repayment to the state for these activities?
There are 2 actions that were finalized, and they have a lot of them. So the Department's enforcement action with HRK was finalized. And so those items, certainly outline the former owner is still the owner of the site. HRK is still an entity that is the owner of that property. But the ability to recover any costs there is probably not a conversation.
And the second question is 2027 beyond, a long-term manager of the site still being sought.
I think another very important piece, something that I know Herb spent a lot of time thinking about what we do the first goal is to get the site in a condition. Some of that punch list that I talked about, some of that's to make sure that the structure is gonna operate and properly attenuate, you know, the heat circulation in the site, the stormwater system. Some of those, I guess, additional punch list items are gonna help make sure the site is set up to be easy for an entity to care for the site. So the first task is to get the closure done in a way that doesn't leave any sort of legacy challenges. Items is manageable. So there's a lot of effort being done into that. And then there is the importance of figuring out how funding will be done to take care of mowing the grass, doing the water quality monitoring, maintaining the pumps. The long-term water quality item has been largely addressed through the agreement from the receiver and Manatee County, which is an important piece of that. But there's still a lot of work that has to be done at the site, proper care for it. And so outlining that and making sure that, you know, for an entity to come forward, they have to have some abilities to have support funds. And so that is a current challenge and is one that, you know, we've got, because of the timing of closure, I suppose we have a little bit of time, but the calendar is moving quickly. It'll be September in a couple of days at 25. And so, you know, that discussion would be one that we very much like it for anybody here for the consortium. We talk about, we all care about who's going to care for the site post closure. I'm sure Herb would gladly open up for all the volunteers that are going to come forward.
Well, not by much.
It's too late for them.
And I might add to that, that everything I'm doing does have an eye to the finality. And it's gonna be a turnkey deal. It won't be just like when I got there, it just sort of landed on me. It won't be like that. It will be, everything be ready to go. Everything's in writing, the ops plan. We've even discussed how we're going to encourage staff to stay on. The people there seem to really like working there, and we will be reducing staff at that time, because once the closure letter is issued, the required testing will be less. We still gotta go do the landscape maintenance, but hopefully the same people will be there, so just somebody will come in and just have to write checks, keep it going. It's just to manage, but it's gonna be pretty simple. We're gonna run the pumps, seepage is going to go through our filters, under Buckeye, to the deep collection. There'll be a return factor, but so far that return of rejects from the well have been less than we had originally estimated. And it will only go down over this time period. So we are positioning the site for a permanent takeover of whoever, whatever organization or something that the department I will work on to try to figure out who it's going to be, and then there will be a funding issue. But in terms of competency, I think that part's going to be pretty easy because we'll have it all running pretty smoothly on that end.
Yeah, and after you got a question, touch on that. Because as you can see, we went through all this talk of designing sovereign mousetrap, so it's in the end there. You turn over to an entity for 50 years, 10 years from now, you don't know who's going to be there. What happened to him? They said, well, it's not convenient this 5 years, let me take it out. You see what I mean? Change the hydraulic feature design. You can screw up the discharge, the outfall. So those components need to stay with it. Don't allow people, well, man, to come here and just dam it up here and remove the pipe, do those sort of things without considering what the intents of the design that don't maintain for 50 years. It can mess up what all our what we put in today. That you ask me one question, do the wrong thing again. So
So there is another question online about whether or not the receivers secured all of the soil or fill that's necessary to adequately close NGS south and north by 2027.
Oh, yeah.
2,500 cubic yards a day.
We have two piles of supplies. We have fill soil and we have sand and dailies. Both of those materials have been completely vetted by Arden. We have sources. For the sand tailings, we get those for free from Mosaic, from the Fort Greene facility in Polk County. And free means I only pay $6 million for hauling. And it's free, I just gotta go get it.
Yeah, the transportation is like,
I just have to go get it.
Can't Creek Reclamation Project.
That line has sufficient reserves for us. Mosaic has set it aside. They're a partner in terms of supporting us in the closure effort. So that part's happening. Dirt is, so far, most of it has come from a couple different sources. Again, hauling is the primary cost. So we try to get a source as close. Right now, it's a Razorback mine, not too far away. They have well enough, we've got with them. They know that we're gonna need about another, 80 to 100,000 cubic yards of dirt. Right now, today, we're bringing in about 3,000 cubic yards of sand tailings every day. 130 to 140 trucks every day. And we run it through a laser scanner, so we measure it down to the 10th of a cubic yard. It automatically generates a ticket and populates an Excel spreadsheet for us. So we have accurate records of what we have. Those are matched off to construction needs. So there will be some changes along the way, but
But it sounds like a yes, you've secured it, yeah.
oh, you wanted just a yes, yeah.
Well, I don't want, yeah, I mean, the question is raised and,
Look, I said no.
I like this information for
I said no. Okay, so it's yes. I'm kind of excited about the whole.
I'm glad you're excited about it.
Is there anything else you want to do?
I don't see any other questions online.
They're good.
And it's close to closing time. I don't know if there's anything we need to close the loop on in terms of decision memos and clarification, or if everybody wants to sort of chew on the response and the information that was provided by the department, and then maybe we can pop it on a future agenda, or you can reach out to us individually and kind of let us know what your thinking is and the will of the group.
Well, it's like, make one comment first. Thank you, everybody, from DEP. All topics today. Really appreciate the clarity and the updates. In terms of like next steps related to the last decision memo and DEP's response, I am wondering if the whole Tampa Bay working group is gonna plan on getting together and maybe provide some guidance on how we might respond, if at all, to DEP's response.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a
I felt like today we heard at least an opening from DEP to listen to some, maybe some modifications to the assessment methodology in lieu of reopening the RA. I think that's something that we should probably try and frame up in a next meeting, and then maybe get with the department again to look at that. But I mean, that's kind of the thing top of mind for me today, based on what we heard and saw.
Okay.
Let's convene the old Tampa.
We can do that.
So before we close up, because I know everybody's, probably wanting to beat the traffic, they even can at this point. Are there any other comments or questions online?
No.
Okay, anything in the room?
Are you gonna set the next day, the next meeting?
I wasn't going to. I think we need to convene the Old Tampa Bay Working Group, and I really would like to wait until we get the loading data from Ray before because I want to make sure I have something of substance before I use your time.
Anything else?
If a probably after it's a or is a whole in favor of it.
All right, class dismissed.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.